All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Here's our little gavel. Steal it from our clerk here for a moment. Welcome, everyone. It is just past 5:30 on this beautiful, warm Tucson summer day. It is Tuesday, June 6th, and in terms of historical facts, today was an easy one. Today we remember the 79th anniversary of D-Day, when in 1946 on this day, 160,000 Allied soldiers landed in Normandy, France, turning the tide in a struggle for World War II. Also on this day, we lost a political legend in 1968 when Robert F. Kennedy, former Attorney General of the U.S. and then candidate for the U.S. presidency, was killed. So some important historical events in June 6, many, many years ago. Ms. Pena, can I start us the meeting with the roll call?
Ms. Ekstrom?
Here.
Ms. Luna Rose? Mr. Romero?
Here.
Ms. Shah?
Here.
Dr. Ravi?
Here. All right, next on our agenda is our land acknowledgement statement. We don't have a student here for that, but I asked Ms. Shah to lead us on the land acknowledgement statement this evening. Ms. Shah.
Thank you. On behalf of the Governing Board of the Tucson Unified School District, I, Sadie Shaw, acknowledge that the schools, buildings, and facilities of the Tucson Unified School District reside on the ancestral homeland of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the federally recognized tribal land of the Pasquayaqui tribe.
Thank you, Ms. Shah. And for roll call, we have Ms. Luna Rose present. All right, next on our agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask all of us to stand. All right. 1, 2, 3. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Trujillo, do we have any agenda adjustments for this evening?
There are no agenda adjustments, President Shaw.
Okay. So we're going to go around. This is a special meeting this evening, so it's just a informational study session for the governing board for us to review, discuss, and get more information about 3 very important topics that our teams and our governing board and our district have been working on over the last, some of it over 6 to 12 months. And so there'll be no actions tonight. There's no votes tonight. Today is just a study session. And so we'll be going over the latest draft of the Code of Conduct, going over some details regarding a call for potential bond election, and discussing our budget and fiscal year budget for the next fiscal year, 23-24 fiscal year. Again, there'll be no actions tonight. There's no call to the audience or superintendent's report. Next week on June 13th will be a regular governing board meeting where we'll be bringing these topics back for action. Dr. Trujillo, we start with our 3.1 school year 23-24 proposed revision to the Code of Conduct.
Yes, President Shaw, members of the governing board, members of the Tucson Unified community, watching us this evening, welcome. And before we get into item 3.1 and kick things off with the Code of Conduct, I want to talk about what the next 2 weeks represent. The next 2 weeks represent a vision and a dream for the Tucson Unified School District. They represent hope for every single employee in the district, for every single parent in the district, and for every single student in the district. The hope that the next 2 years will be dramatically better in their lives here in TUSD schools and classrooms than they have been the last 2 or 3. Our community has struggled through the pandemic era, closure of the district and all the challenges that online schooling brought. Our district has struggled with a dramatic and a very pronounced lack of adequate funding for facilities and deferred maintenance that have led to challenging conditions in buildings and classrooms and buses across the district. Layer on top of that some long-standing challenges with the current Code of Conduct that have created a sense of frustration, a lack of control, and a lack of safety in a lot of our school classrooms and our buildings. And I want to paint the picture of where we want our employees to feel, what we want them to feel like, what we want them to experience in 2 years. So there's no coincidence that a potential bond effort and sweeping revisions to the Code of Conduct appear on the same agenda. Because our vision in the next 2 years is that every single individual teacher in this district, 2 school years from now, looks back on this time and says, in the last 2 years, discipline and safety have gotten dramatically better in my classroom and on my campus. I feel supported. I feel like learning is the central activity in my class now, and managing disciplinary situations no longer dominate my time as they did before. I can walk across my campus and feel a renewed sense of safety. And along with that, 2 years from now, we want that very same teacher to look around their classroom and feel an HVAC system that is chilly and cool and working for them and the students, to see new furniture, new desks, a new teacher workstation, to see flooring that isn't cracked, flooring that says, we value you as a professional, we value this learning space. We want them to have technology that is working. We want them to have an internet connection that is blazing fast. We want them to have a modern and a renovated classroom that says, we value you as a professional. To our students, 2 years from now, we want you sitting in these classrooms where the air condition is chilly in the summer and our heating keeps you warm during the winter. We want you walking into band rooms, to new instruments. We want you walking across stages that have been newly renovated and have new curtains and have new sound systems. We want you going to bathrooms that you once avoided and now you use with pride, because there are new stalls and there's new flooring and there's running water and sinks have been replaced and facilities have been modernized. And to our parents, these items represent a vision of our district in 2 years, where you no longer hear the same concerns about dilapidated facilities, lack of fencing that keeps your kids safe, lack of gating, lack of camera systems. We want you to experience in 2 years a district where you no longer hear about roofs caving in, or leaky faucets, or students that are in basements at University High School, or where floors are cracked, or where kids are crammed into spaces that are no longer able to accommodate them. And more importantly, we don't want you to hear any longer about a district that is perceived to be dangerous, or where student disciplinary incidents characterize the school day. We want you in 2 years to hear about a district that has reprioritized learning, where learning is the central focus of every classroom, where classroom environments are safe, orderly, where principals feel like they have the authority and the autonomy to maintain safe learning communities, and most importantly, where our teachers feel like they are supported and the learning is the primary focus of the classroom. And lastly, in 2 years, we want all of our employees to look back and say, over the last 2 years, I have received compensation that also says that I matter and that I'm valued, that the work that I do is appreciated here. And I appreciate the last 2 years' raises have been better for me than the previous 3, 4, or 5. That is the dream. And that is the dream. And that is why we have these agenda items on here. It starts with a study session tonight about a code of conduct that we feel features a proposal of revisions that will strike that balance of teaching our students new behaviors, holding our students accountable while still keeping them in school and not giving up on them, but holding them accountable, teaching them those new behaviors so they can be a part of our learning community with better decision making, and balancing that with the need to support our teachers inside of the classroom to make sure that disciplinary situations are not dominating instructional time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anna Warmbrand. She joins us from our nation's capital. She will be facilitating tonight's study session on the finalized set of revisions. A note about revisions to the viewing public. The revisions are publicly available on our webpage. You can go to your local school site. You will see featured prominently on your school's main website the link to get into the Code of Conduct revisions. You can leave us public comments on any area of the revisions or the performance impact analysis itself, or you can access the link to view the revisions on the district's main page. Those are going to be open and available all the way through the governing board's potential vote a week from tonight on June 13th. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Warmbrand.
Good evening. Hopefully everyone can hear me correctly. Good evening, School Board President, Dr. Shaw. Good evening, esteemed school board members, Dr. Trujillo, and our head legal counsel, Mr. Roth. I wanted to share with all of you this evening our presentation for our recommended revisions. We call this our red line document because you're going to see both the current code of conduct next to our proposals and recommendations for your consideration. And so what we have at the very top is a summary of what the major revision pieces are and some changes in language. And so I'm going to go through these top pieces first, and then I'd like to go one by one through each revision and compare it to what sits currently within the code of conduct. And you'll see I'm going to go very deliberately through the elementary section. And then when we get to middle and high school, I will go deliberately through those pieces and parts. And you'll see that there's some consistencies throughout this document. And then there's also pieces and parts that really speak to the level at which a student is in our grades and what they need to help them make their best choices. So our first revision, and this one you've seen, it's an oldie but a goodie, and all stakeholders agreed on this one, was the code of conduct would be broken into separate sections, one for elementary, one for middle, and one for high school. Our second revision, and I will tell you revision number 2, and I mentioned this to the board the last time, that piece in part, we will probably roll into an additional PIA that will go with our disciplinary JK policies. I am keeping it in this piece in part, but if you don't see it to vote next time, you'll see it again in the future. But this is definitely something that our stakeholders have asked for, that we are able to extend DAPE. Our revision number 3 is that our hearing officers have an option to offer alternative education programs in addition or in extension, or to lessen certain types of suspendable offenses so that a child can transition into an alternative program faster than if they were to return back to the school in which they had struggled. And remember, if they're going to see our hearing officers, this is a level 4 or level 5 offense. These are our most serious infractions. Our revision number 4, and you're going to see this grade level progression for elementary, middle, and high school. And these are a consequence progression. And then revision 5, and you'll see this language, of course, in the final document, but we will add the language of audio, visual recording, and photographs without prior consent to our telecommunication device and improper use, which is a level 2. Revision number 6. And so this gets into really the meat of what Dr. Trujillo had just spoke about in terms of making our campuses safer and looking at how we can support staff as well as provide very clear boundaries to students in terms of what needs to be happening on our campuses. So we looked at our threats and intimidation, the whole threats and intimidation piece in part. And so you'll see here the original indicating by words or conduct the intent to cause physical injury or serious damage to a person or property, or intentionally placing another person in reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury. This may include threats or intimidation that occur online or through a telecommunication device. So that language in and of itself isn't going to change drastically, but what piece and part had been missing is what happens when that threat and intimidation is not towards a peer, but rather towards a staff member. So what we added is indicating, and you can see the revised description below, by words or conduct, the intent to cause physical injury to a TUSD employee or guest on TUSD property, or serious damage to a TUSD employee's property or guest of the district's property, or intentionally placing a TUSD employee or TUSD guest in reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury. This may include conduct that occurs through a telecommunication or digital device or online. And so that piece in part has never been specifically stated in our code of conduct. And so we were treating a threat to a staff member with the same type of leveling that we would treat to a peer. And so what we're asking is that we add the language for our TUSD guests and employees and that is moved from a level 3 to a level 4 infraction, which would be a long-term suspension or parts of that held into an abeyance. And we'll go through for elementary, middle, and high school as we go through our progression charts what that would look like. But that's a significant change to our threats and intimidation. And we also have a level 4 threats, school threats, verbal. It says in parentheses, and, you know, really speaking to our stakeholders and our legal counsel, it's a redundancy. If you have a school threat, we already have a level 5 school threat, whether it be verbal or otherwise. We'd like to remove that level 4. We believe that all school threats, and this is stakeholder input very clearly, all school threats, verbal or otherwise, should be taken at a level 5 seriousness, which is a long-term suspension, potential expulsion, and we do call law enforcement. So those are the significant changes to our threats and intimidation section. We have another revision piece and part, revision number 8, that really looks at the defiance and disrespect piece and part. And so within our original, you can see that it's a level 2 offense when it's a peer. Engaging in repeated behavior, including but not limited to refusing to follow directions, talking back, or engaging in socially rude interactions. And so for level 2 offenses, there's a lot of interventions and remediations that could take place. You can see there's language underneath that says it's up to an administrator's discretion if they would like to elevate that disrespect to a level 3, but there needed to be some ongoing and escalating pieces in that behavior. And so, and that was only directed towards a staff member. So we wanted to become more specific in our language for what defiance and disrespect could be defined as. And we would like to move it to a level 3. I don't, administrators don't, parents don't, kids don't. None of our stakeholders said that they want more paperwork for requests of elevation if a staff member is being disrespected in the schools. So if we could just scroll up one more page, thank you so much. So level 2 to level 3 when involving a staff member. So right now we have some language, as I shared, that an administrator can request with either myself or the regional superintendent. But what we're asking is that this be the new definition, and that when defiance and disrespect is with involving a staff member, that it's a level 3 violation, that there's no need for a request for elevation of discipline. This is the new definition that we propose. Engaging in socially rude interactions in which there is disrespect and resistance to a staff member's directive or request. And disrespect, engaging in intentional behavior with staff that insults one's race, appearance, professionalism, general insults that involve curse words, throwing objects at staff members, destroying classroom property belonging to the staff member. And I will tell you, our internal committee looked at definitions from all over the state that other districts in here in Tucson are using for this. And for both our threats and intimidation and defiance and disrespect, we had the most vague language out of those codes of conduct. So we're really adapting this verbiage and what other districts are using. So this isn't something that we just made up off the top of our heads in terms of definitions. These are commonly used definitions that many, 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 many other school districts engage with for staff. So I just wanted to mention that. We made some revision recommendations to the general beginning part of the document where we look at action levels. And so what we see here where it says guidance, we're not asking to change that initial piece. The only piece that we would be taking out is that actions listed in bold are the minimum and mandatory action for the level of violation. You'll see as we set this for progression of consequences, that sentence is no longer necessary. It's an aesthetic piece that won't be necessary if these recommended revisions are approved by all of you here. And then this wonderful list that you see in front of you where we crossed out level 1, these were previously the consequences that sat with level 1. We don't want to remove these as options and pieces and parts that administrators can utilize for any infraction, whether it be a level 1, a 2, a 3, in some instances a 4, especially if there's some abeyance pieces and parts in play or behavior contracts. So these aren't pieces and parts that we would eliminate. They're an and, not an or. And you'll see that for our level 1 consequences, we have progression charts now for all grade levels. And so this is something that would sit as supportive actions and interventions in each section, but they are not the progression of consequences that you'll see in just a moment on this chart. So instead of level 1, you will see that these are consequences that can be added and utilized throughout progressions. So we're going to get right into the elementary revisions. And you're going to see a lot of consistencies in revisions from elementary, middle, and high school. The major differences you'll see will not sit in where the revisions to the action levels sit, but rather the consequence progression for each of the grade levels. So you can see this is the original document. And you can see for level 1, this is a very long list of pieces and parts that administrators could engage in. These are actions that they could take to assist any child, whether the child be 5, 15, 12, when they have a level 1 infraction. Our level 2 consequence list, you could see it basically entailed everything from level 1 and then some social skills groups options. And so when our administrators would look at how to progress if a child had a level 2 infraction, it was just the same list as level 1. So when we started the process of revision, you can see we started to look for our elementary learners. And this was initially what you all had seen a month ago, is we started to look and we said, well, we got to make sure everything is in adherence to our K-4 law. But I will tell you, after our second meeting with all of you and sharing those revisions, we got an extensive amount of feedback from elementary administrators, from district personnel, from parents, teachers, lots of emails saying, we understand the K-4 law is in play. Can we please have a progression chart for elementary just as you do for middle and high school? So we went back to the drawing board. And so what you'll see tonight is a progression chart for consequences for elementary as well. So this was the original piece and part that we sat with in the code of conduct, and we can move to the beginning of the progression charts now. So, and you can see this was intentionally our level 5 is placed right before our original level 1, where you're going to start to see progression charts. Level 5, although it will look aesthetically differently, right? We're going to do a whole new look if you approve these revisions. But the actual consequences in level 5 are not going to be changing. And that's because those are our most serious infractions, and they involve law enforcement. They involve, as you know, your own hearing officers for expulsion and those pieces and parts. And so those are pieces and parts that are really binded by law and our obligation for extreme safety on campus. There's not a stakeholder that said, let's look at progressions for level 5. And in the same way, you won't see progressions for level 4, just a little bit of flexibilities with abeyance. Those are our most serious infractions, as you know. So level 1 for elementary school, this was our original level 1, and you've seen this. That didn't change from the piece and part I just discussed. What you see now underneath the recommended revisions is a progression chart. And so what you will see, and we put parent contact in each piece and part to be as clear as possible, is that this matches what you've seen previously for middle school and high school, except, of course, what the actual consequences are. But you'll see you have a first offense, then a second, third, fourth offense are these pieces and parts that you can use for a second, third, and fourth offense. These are your options. And then you'll see a fifth offense option, and this sits consistently. So for offense number 1, for a level 1 offense for our elementary learners, and this is K5, student conference and a parent contact. For a second offense, you may receive some detention with parent contact and a 1-day reassignment. And of course, your parent will be contacted, and you'll see reassignment to a different class is still one of those level 1 interventions that was already previously in place here in TUSD. And it's something that matches what we can do for a level 1 offense within our K-4 law as well. We also want to see an MTSS referral if these are continuing behaviors and a behavioral contract. If a child gets to a 5th offense, a level 1, then they can fill out a request to elevate discipline for either my approval or their regional superintendents. So that's our level 1 offenses for elementary. And in the actual violations, you'll see that for elementary specifically, they would like to remove the unexcused absence for 1 class period from their section, and the unexcused absence and the arriving to school late. And that's only for our elementary learners. That is not a revision that middle school and high school supported. But they feel, our stakeholders felt, and particularly our elementary group that works so hard on these revisions, that it's not the student's fault if they're late to school. And if they don't have an acceptable excuse, that's really up to the adult to call them inappropriately. And so, and 1 class period is not really applicable to our younger learners, so they did not feel that those pieces and parts were appropriate for our attendance violations. But they would like to have leaving school without signing out. Those kiddos that are running off campus, they would like to keep that as a level 1 offense, and leaving school without permission. But they would like to take those other pieces out because they feel that that's an adult concern and it's not something a child should be penalized for. When you look at our level 2, you can see that the options for a level 2 offense currently in our code of conduct is basically anything from level 1 plus a restorative conference. And then you might get some guidance from staff, a counselor, a social worker, or a qualified staff member. So there wasn't really very much variation in what happens for a level 2 consequence. Here's our recommended revisions for the progression for the same violation type. So I just want to remind you, it's if a child has an attendance violation, a first offense, and then they have verbal provocation as their second offense, for example, that's not the same violation type. But if they have an aggression for a first offense and another aggression act for a second offense, that would be the same violation type. So it's not just any offense and they progress through. It has to be consistent within a certain violation type. And I know that I did share that at the last meeting, but I'm happy to go over as many pieces and parts, of course, as you may need. So provocation, they would like move from a level 1 to a level 2, and you'll see that consistently for elementary, middle, and high school. For our level 2 offenses, for progression, we want a student conference and a parent contact, detention and parent contact, and you'll see that this is the same for a level 1 and 2 for our first and second offenses. Once you get to your third offense, you're going to see a more extended reassignment, and in adherence with the K-4 law, the potential for an in-school suspension. So, and that would be 1 to 3 days with parent contact. For our 5 and 6-year-old learners, this is not often utilized. A lot of reassignment occurs because of the K-4 law, but for our 4th and 5th graders, this can become applicable. Now, does it look different from reassignment? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, depending on the staffing at the school site. MTSS referral, a parent conference, a behavior contract, and a counselor referral. And then if they have a 5th offense, then that would escalate with a request to elevate discipline to either myself or their regional to a level 3 offense. And then we can move on to our level 3 pieces and parts. And I promise, as we get to the middle and high school, you're going to see a lot of repeats. So we can move a little bit quicker through that piece if you would like. So for our level 3, the original basically said any actions previously from level 1 and 2, which, as you know, 2 said any actions previously from level 1. So we're still looking at that very long list of pieces and parts from level 1. But now we can have an in-school or out-of-school suspension or abeyance short-term 1 to 10 days. And that was up to the administrator's discretion, whether it was 8 days, 3 days, 2 days, 2 days of in-house, 10 days of out. So there was a lot of variability, which I know we have discussed in some previous meetings about that being some concerns for some of our learners, which is completely legitimate. So, but only where student misbehavior is ongoing and escalating, and only after the school has first attempted and documented the types of interventions. And so this piece in part, and this was for all of our learners, saying that the behavior had to be ongoing and escalating. So what that meant is there was a variety of times that kids could engage in level 3 behaviors where there wasn't recourse except what you saw in our level 1 interventions and consequences, because level 2, there was no differentiation between level 1. And here you're at level 3 and you can utilize level 1 and 2. But it had to be ongoing and escalating. So a child had to do a couple of things that were documented without there being a consequence that had any exclusionary piece and part to it, including an in-school suspension. Now what we're asking is that our level 1 offense, of course, there's a parent conference for all of these level 3 offenses. And there's an in-school or out-of-school or a combination option or reassignment, right? For our 5 and 6-year-olds in adherence with the K-4 law, we would look at classroom reassignment for 1 to 2 days. For our second offense, 2 to 4 days. And for our third offense, 4 to 7. So we wouldn't want a child out longer consistently than 7 days. And the thought for a level 3 offense would be that day that the issue occurs. Oftentimes we'll code that as in-school suspension because they are removed from the area they're in. And then if this is their third offense of a level 3 violation, then they have the maximum of 5 to 6 days out, with, we would hope, the day returning back to be either a reassignment or an in-school suspension day to transition back into their classroom. If they have a fourth offense, then that's an elevation request for discipline with either myself or their regional superintendent. So this is the recommendation for revisions for level 3. And then I want to talk about what we would like to move to level 3. And so there are many level 3 offenses that are not changing. These are the major ones, though, that we'd like to level consistently to a level 3. And this is, and I'm going to go through this piece by piece, but know that this piece in part is consistent for your middle and for your high school. So what you see here are changes that we're recommending for all of our learners, kinder through 12th grade. And so we would like to move our tobacco violations from a level 2 to a level 3 for possession. We would like to move alcohol from a level 4 for use to a level 3. We would like to have illicit drugs move from a level 4 to a level 3 so that they move through our progression chart. And we would like to move those pieces and parts. And if you could scroll up or down, up, down. Fighting as well from a level 4 to a level 3. Now, I understand on the face of it, people say, wait a minute, you're going to move a level for illicit drugs from something that was a more serious infraction level of consequence to something that was less. It was less, different, vague, more variability in the current code of conduct. But when we look at what level 4 looked like, I think you'll understand, hopefully, the logic behind the movement. It's better for kids and it's better for campuses, so say our committee. So you can see that's the movement of the violations, and that would sit for all of our learners. And so if we could keep scrolling, then hopefully this will make more sense as we move through these pieces and parts. And I don't know if you want to go back to what the level 3 consequences would be now that you see those offenses, but you'll see them in middle and high school just a little differently. And I'm happy to go back.
Ms. Warren, there's a
if
lot of
need be.
information. Maybe I'll have a little pause here to see if any of the governing board members have any questions
Yeah.
about some of the main
Thank you.
revisions on the first page and any of the elementary school revisions. Any questions or feedback or comments or anything from our governing board members? Ms. Ekstrom and then Ms. Shaw.
Yes. So these offenses are offenses that occur within one school year?
Yes. So that piece in part, we are not recommending to revise. These are typically what we've done always with policy is that this is school year to school year. So once a new school year starts, those days start anew for a kid. And so, and that's true. We have to adhere to our IDEA, our special education law as well. Their days start also again. So they hit a 10-day maximum for certain offenses and pieces and parts. And so for all of our learners, when a new year starts, this piece and part starts again. So we're not looking at like a violation from when they were 6 and then they're 15 and they have a second violation and now they move through
Yeah,
the
no, I don't
progression
mean
chart.
that. I mean, say it's the elementary school. So say it's, third grade and there's, violations of bullying from one person to another. And then they've done it twice in one school year. Well, then the next year they continue to do it again to the same person. So that starts over?
No, thank
Okay.
you so much for asking. That's a beautiful question. And so what the recommended revision is that it sits within the grade level bands. So if these issues continue through their elementary school career, like you stated, the bullying incident, then they would move through that bullying progression during their elementary school, but with a chance for a clean slate when they begin in middle school and a chance for a clean slate when they begin in high school. And that is a piece and part that I will tell you was a deep discussion amongst stakeholders. And so our recommended revision is that when they start within their next grade band, that piece and part starts over. But while they are still within the K-5 code of conduct piece, that it progresses through their violations. As it starts within their middle school, it progresses through their middle school and then starts again in high school. Thank you for asking that piece and part. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation also, Ms. Warnbren, and thank you to Ms. Ekstrom for asking that important question. Just going to piggyback real quick off of Ms. Ekstrom's question. If that indeed is the case, then is that going to be outlined in the code of conduct? Because at this point, that's not stated explicitly that similar violations will follow a kid throughout their grades if it's like, elementary school, as you stated. And so is that going to be written out explicitly?
Yes, and it's in the list of violations that was at the top of the page. I know this is a ton. I knew when I was going over the red line revisions, it would be a lot to dissect for sure. So the top part, that is one of those, and it will be explicitly stated within each section. At the beginning of the elementary, at the beginning of the middle, and the beginning of the high school. And when we train site administration, they'll be trained on that piece and part as well.
Okay, thank you. And so my next question is, for these level 1 violations, I'm looking at the original and all of the menu of things that teachers can use, and then the revised version, which is much less things for teachers to rely on. But as you said, they can still use some of these things. But will this chart be in the code of conduct still? Okay.
Yes, for sure. And it's actually something that the MTSS team and I have talked about this entire year, is some of these are beautiful interventions that partner up with consequence just so well. And some of these are actual consequences. And so there hadn't really been a lot of differentiation. And so these are things that can be in addition to what's occurring within the progression chart. And this will sit like I said, we'll take out the level 1 part, but this will sit in the beginning of the elementary, the middle, and the high school. So folks know that this is not something that we're not using. It just isn't the cornerstone of the consequence progression. It's an addition if need be.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't see any further questions. Ms. Wormbrand, please continue.
All right. So here we go with our middle school section. And you will see that they have a progression chart. All of these progression charts mirror each other. The difference is simply how many days of in school, out of school, when detention starts, when there's a conference. Those are the major variations. For our level 1 offenses, for our middle school kiddos, student conference, parent contact. Offense number 2 sits just the same as our elementary kiddos, detention, parent contact. Here's where the difference begins. Middle school has requested the option of a 1 day of ISI for a third offense. And then you have always our MTSS referral parent conference behavior contract. So for multiple offenses after the first and second, middle school administrators and community have asked for the option of 1 day of in-school suspension, and they are staffed for a teacher in a classroom for that piece and part. If a child gets to the 5th offense, then there can be a request to elevate discipline to a level 2, and that needs my approval or the regional superintendent. Level 2, you've seen this before. It just says do what level 1 says, and here's some extra support. So what we're looking at is, you can see offense number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's the same type of band progressions, and we can keep going through that piece and part. And we're looking at a recommended revision of detention, parent contact. Then you see that there's some increased in-school suspension options for level 2. And if you remember those charts from a couple of months ago, ISI was an option that many stakeholders, both staff, parents, said was underutilized, and they'd like to see that more utilized versus an out-of-school suspension piece. Parent conference, behavior contract, MTSS referral, counselor referral. These are all pieces and parts that we'd like to see utilized for a level 2 offense. And then, of course, if you have a 5th offense, a level 2, then you can have a request to elevate discipline. And then again, as I said, you're going to see verbal provocation, the request from it to move from a level 1 to a level 2. And that's because that provocation piece leads to aggression more often than not on our campuses. And so having the option of progressive consequence at a level 2 was what stakeholders had hoped for. Level 3. So again, it's the same for elementary, right? We had the same consequences for everyone. And so that's our level 3 consequences. And then our recommended action for progression starts with an OSS or an ISS of 1 to 3 days for a first offense with parent conference. Parent conference for second offense, and 3 to 5 days ISI or OSS or a combination. For our third offense, we're looking at OSS, ISI with a 5 to 10 day option. And for level 4 offense, an elevation if need be to request discipline. And you'll see that we don't have a 5th offense option for our middle school, right? Once you get to a level 3 consequence, if you have a 4th aggression and you've already had a suspension of up to 10 days and you've moved through this progression model, then we would like to see administrators have the option to request and elevate for discipline. Otherwise, they can utilize their offense 1, 2, or 3 consequences. So this is the important piece, right? When we think about level 3, is that when we're leveling tobacco, alcohol, and illicit drug violations to a level 3, what you can see for both our elementary, middle, and you'll see it in high school, is that those consequences of progression start with an ISI start with an OSS potential. For elementary, you're looking at definite ISI options, reassignments, detentions, whereas currently you see level 4 for first offense drug use and second offense drug use, and for our fights as well, are 1 day out of school suspension. And you can see that if we scrolled all the way back up to our action levels at the very beginning, I hate to do this, but I want to make sure before we move on to high school, this is like very crystally clear all the way up to the top. I just want to remind the board that although it may look like we're doing a lesser action level, the consequences themselves are actually more substantial for the safety of our campuses. So what you see, all right, let's stop right there. Our level 4, you could see fighting. First offense was 1 day out of school if they agree to a mediation, and 3 days for a second offense if they agree to a mediation. Possessions of drugs or alcohols was a 1 day out of school suspension if they take a drug awareness class, or 3 days out of school suspension if they take a drug awareness class. So you weren't able to suspend more than 3 days until a third offense of drugs or fighting on our campuses. And so I really wanted to share that with all of you, because people said, wait, you're moving drug offenses? Yes, but we're moving it so that we have children who can progress through the offenses and our campuses can be safer in those pieces and parts. So thank you. I just wanted to remind everyone what existed before, since, it looks like we're moving to a lesser, but actually the consequences progress in a much more consistent pace for kids and for safety for our campuses. So thank you for scrolling. I appreciate you so much. I miss my clicker at times like this. So you can see as we move through it, and we'll get back to where we were, that although we are moving what would look like down to a level 3, we're actually going to be able to progress starting with a 1 to 3 day in or out of school suspension, and then progressing 3 to 5 days, and then 5 to 10. And so right away, administrators have the option of keeping their campuses safer and issuing consequences for drug, alcohol, and tobacco use. So all of those will have those same progressions at a level 3, as well as fights. So even though, yes, it's 4 to a 3, the level 3 consequences are more significant in terms of what administrators have options for than what currently exists. So is this a good stopping point for a second? Dr. Shaw, you tell me, sir.
Sure. Let's have another pause here. I have a few questions, and Dr. Trujillo has his hand up as well. So I'll turn over to Dr. Trujillo first.
For clarity, right now, Mrs. Warmbrand, I like that you went back to the beginning to talk about what exists now for fights. And what exists now is you get 1 day, and if the administrator wants to escalate it to 3, they have to prove that it's an immediate threat to safety and that it's an ongoing and escalating situation. This recommended format on a first fight says you can go 3 days off-campus suspension, or you can go 3 days in-school suspension, or you can mix and match. An administrator no longer has to contact student relations or a regional assistant superintendent to request an escalation beyond 1 day. So I think that's a very, very important item to note. And then also, just for clarification, once you commit a third offense at level 3, it could be fight, it could be possession, it could be under the influence, you are now going to level 4, which of course, now you're in the area of long-term suspensions and eligibility for DAPE and alternative programming. Am I missing anything on that? I just want to make sure we're clear. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. So my first question, Ms. Warmbrand, looking at in middle school, the level 3 consequences in revision, each offense number has its own column. But at the level 2, offense 2, 3, and 4 are grouped into one column. So is that intentional? So in the second offense, we can do an MTS referral. On a fourth offense, we might do it in school intervention.
The intentionality behind that piece and part is staying within the nature of what the original code of conduct had, which was a lot of intervention requirements in addition to some suspension pieces, or in actually the case of level 2, none. We've actually added some. But intentionally, because we're now leveling our fights, which is a major piece of our aggression violations, and drug, alcohol, and tobacco to level 3 for our middle and high schools. And we just wanted to be very specific that there is a progression, because the impact of those pieces and parts on health and safety on our campuses is significant. And so if the board would like to recommend any, obviously revisions, we'll do as you all recommend, and would like to see those offenses a 1, 2, and 3 in the same way, or a switch and make it more deliberately divided up, that's absolutely something that can be done. It's deliberate though for why we did it, because of the movement of some of our serious offenses.
Well, thank you. That wasn't to state that I disagreed with this, but just wanted to clarify that. And then my second question, there's no level 4 or 5 listed in middle school or elementary school. Is that just because there's no revisions to that? And I know we're talking about that in a high school level 4, or is it, those don't exist in the elementary or middle school levels?
So there is a level 4 progression and a recommendation, but it's consistent for all elementary and middle. And so we saved it till the very end after we go through 1, 2, and 3 progressions for middle and high school, because it sits exactly the same for all of our learners. There's not any variation to the level 4 and level 5. We are making no recommended revisions to that consequence piece or what sits as a level 5. And that was really a discussion with our committee and Michael Arnoff and guidance there as he sits on our internal committee, that really with level 5, we don't have a lot of flexibility in those pieces and parts, being that they are our most serious offenses. There's a progression we have to take with those. So that's why you don't see any level 5 changes in that piece and part, but we'll have it look aesthetically the same as you would, but it won't be a progression chart. But you will see for level 4 some changes just at the end of this piece and part, because it's exactly the same for all 3 levels.
Thank you. Any other questions on middle school, elementary school, or anything we discussed so far? Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. Just want to touch base on something that Dr. Trujillo said about principals not needing to go to this regional superintendent to elevate discipline. Is that what I heard? And just some clarification on that.
So the parameters around the amount of days that a principal can opt to place a student in school suspension or out of school suspension, it's now capped at 3. So they have between 1 and 3 to choose from. Previously, it was just 1, and they would have to get permission and authorization from a regional assistant superintendent to go beyond 1 day. And these new revisions now say they can go as high as 3, no higher than that.
For a first offense?
For a first fight and for your first fight, your first incidence of possession of drug and alcohol. This also differs because an administrator can choose in-school suspension. So an administrator doesn't have to be locked into an out-of-school suspension. They now have the option of saying on a first fight, we can do in-school suspension. And they now have the option to mix, to minimize if an administrator is worried about a student's time off of campus, a student that may rely on the transportation or the food services. They may say, we'll do 3 days total consequence, but I will limit your off-campus suspension to 1 day. You'll come back and do 2 days of in-school suspension, or they can do 3 days of in-school suspension to keep the student on the campus. So the autonomy and the options for the campus administration to work with individual students is expanded while also expanding the consequence at the same time. So they just wanted to be very clear on these revisions because these are the two infractions that pretty much everybody is looking at right now. It's what are we going to do with these first fights? What are we going to do with possession? So I want to make sure we had a clear understanding. Right now, you don't have that autonomy. You have 1 day and then the student is back. Unless you can prove that the situation is an ongoing and escalating threat to the safety of the school or the classroom. And that's the current code of conduct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I'm just concerned that, seems like checking in with the regional superintendent could be like a checks and balances type thing where, if there's a new administrator, perhaps they could do, give them a violation that may be heavy-handed. And so I'm just a little concerned that, this may be abused, that autonomy, though I'm sure could be useful in some cases. And that sort of leads me to my question about the language here in the asterisk that's bolded due to the mutual involvement of participants, principals / assistant principals will grant an automatic waiver of the mandatory minimum 10-day long-term suspension. That word will is a little confusing because it kind of seems like, it's a mandatory thing. They will grant you, that reduction. And so I was wondering if the term or the word may would be better suited there since it seems like that's an option.
Where are you, Ms. Shaw? Which section?
Where I'm right here, due to the mutual involvement. Yeah. Next to fighting.
So, within the progression piece and part, we are hoping to minimize both the need to request elevations for discipline and the waiver. But yes, any of that language that you see will, should, those pieces and parts can absolutely change. We're hoping that the waiver won't be as necessary in this piece and part because of the level progression. And just to just piggyback on what Dr. Trujillo said, administrators don't do currently requests of elevation for discipline for their first offense fights or their first drug offenses now because the code of conduct is very strict that it's 1 day if they either agree to a drug awareness class or if they agree to a restorative mediation. And so they're not progressing those pieces and parts through the Office of Student Relations or the regional superintendent. It's just 1 day out. We don't grant requests of elevation of discipline if it's a 1 day out and the child has agreed to it. It's when there's multiple fights, defiance, disrespect. There's a lot of other violations that we do get requests for elevation of discipline, but these ones that are fixed on the 1 day are typically not because folks know that that's what sits in the code of conduct and that's what's been traditionally supported. So that piece and part wouldn't change. I will tell you, Ms. Shaw, that in any of these changes and pieces and parts, I very much will have very consistent monitoring and supports for our new administrators because this is a different mindset within a progression model, and making sure that they're sticking within the 1 to 3 days is critical. And then 3 to 5 and 5 to 10, right, if you're at your middle school level, because we don't want this to be something that people then just feel like they can add days on that aren't within the limits that Dr. Trujillo spoke of the 1 to 3. So I just wanted to acknowledge your concern, absolutely, especially with new administrators, that they understand that progression chart well. And that it's our job to work with our regional superintendents to ensure that they are matching the progression correctly with the code.
Thank you.
Ms. Shaw, do you feel your concern was being answered, and is there anything else you want to follow up on?
I mean, I think I'm glad that you have your eye on it for if this does pass. That I know you said at our last meeting that you're keeping track of all kinds of data sets in regards to
Yes.
these disciplines. And so if you could let us know if these are being abused by certain schools or whatever, I'm glad that you're keeping a close eye on it, because I think there could be a potential to that could get out of hand.
And just to follow up that piece in part, as I have sat in the EDI department with Dr. Kanasha Brown, that partnership will continue through this next year in terms of folks receiving their very specific data for each school site for their stakeholders and the ethnicity that they support and represent as directors. And so that piece in part will continue through this year. And the longer I'm in this position, the more specific data sets I'm able to learn to obtain. And so our equity directors are now receiving literally the school sites that impact those folks that they advocate for, those students they advocate for, with the school names, the amount of suspensions, and those pieces and parts. So we're getting even more specific and clearer with our data sets as this year goes on. And our rhythm of sharing that data is becoming very consistent on a weekly basis. So I wanted to mention that piece in part as well.
Mr. Romero, go ahead.
So real quick, you had mentioned that you will have support for administrators for, if this does pass, that you'll be able to work with them on this, or do they also go through like a training? How, just so I can see if, like I said, if it passes, how does that look like with administration and getting this to all, everybody that's, on our campuses?
Would you like me to answer that, Dr. Trujillo?
Yes, please. You talk about our planned administrative summer training in July. As soon as we get very funds.
His mic was not on. He said, yes, go ahead and talk about this, Ms. Warmbrand.
Okay.
The
Yeah,
mic
I
doesn't
couldn't
work.
hear. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Warner.
So we have, it's very, very timely, sir, that you asked that question. I actually was on the phone with Heidi Aranda, who's working with Flori Hewitt, of course, right before this meeting about a time that we're going to sit and block through those 3 days of training that our administrators come to, as well as our new administrator training, our new teacher orientation, and those pieces and parts, to set the appropriate time aside for those trainings. Dr. Trujillo has been incredibly supportive with the Office of Student Relations in ensuring that we have time to train administrators on the code of conduct, on entering in synergy, how we manage behavior pieces and parts. So we have had ILA time very consistently with administrators on a monthly basis through our department, and we have time already set aside at those first 3 days that we'll return back to really go over the code of conduct and the new revisions. And so you're always so timely, sir, when you ask the question. I go, you know what? Just an hour ago, I literally started mapping that piece out with our wonderful PD folks. So 100% there will be time, and there has to be. And even Charlotte Brown, our compliance liaison, myself, will oftentimes situate ourselves actually at schools on a cycle within that first 3 to 4 weeks, and just be there on campus as things come up, so that we can talk through how you would handle it within the code, whether they're entering pieces and parts and synergy appropriately. And so that's a practice we've had this past year that will continue on, especially with our new program specialists to be able to support. So we are very hands-on in that piece and part. I'll drive to the school and sit there and side by side with the principal with entering and decision making. So that will continue as well.
So, and then a follow-up question on that. So that's for the administration and teachers. How does, again, assuming this passes, how does this get out to the parents, the students of the school? Is this something that they're given to at the beginning of the year? Is this something online? How does that look also?
So what administrators have been asked to do in the past is to make sure that this information is shared with their student population, right? And that depends on the level. So for our elementary learners, that could be a school assembly where we go over behavior expectations and we show what the book looks like. For our middle and high school learners, it can run through our core content strands or our social studies strand where they're shown where the link to the book is and they're talking about the changes in those pieces and parts. I'll be working with our regional superintendents for the rhythm that piece rolls out, professional development for staff for what our new code of conduct will be required at the beginning of the year, so they know we have a new document. And that's very site-based, but it is something that I already discussed with our professional development team about making that piece and part something at the beginning of the year that administrators do go through, because it has to be shared with staff so they know. Also publicly on our website, in the same way that we sent out 1 million reminders to come to community forums and do the survey, we'll be blasting out that there's a new code of conduct. It'll be very visible. It'll be a brand new doc. We're going to print some copies, but we're also going to make sure that it's very easy to access online via an app. And it's just a real quick click on the website, not something where you have to dig through a DSEG page or any of those pieces and parts, although it will sit there as well. So we want to make it as accessible as possible. And as I've shared with you all, I'll dry run it with my husband. Can you find it? How quick can you find it? And how good is this piece and part? I will also share that there's been some stakeholder requests from staff and from community to continue to have potentially quarterly community forums that discuss discipline issues, concerns, or share what's happening within the code of conduct. And so I'm very open to any of those community building pieces and parts for sure. But we want everyone to have this information as quickly as possible as soon as the document is done.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Any other comments, feedback, questions from the governing board before we move on to the high school session? All right, Ms. Wormbrand, you may continue.
Okay, so our high school session, this section looks in terms of what the original pieces and parts are. Look the same, of course, because it was the same level 1, everything, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But you can see that within our progressions for our level 1 offenses, we put potential parent contact for the first offense. That was really important for our high school administrators because our kids are getting older. And if it's a level 1 offense and it's the first time, they want the autonomy to be able to say to the student, hey, this is the issue. Please get it together. We know you can handle your business, and then move on without involving a parent because they are in high school. And this is only for a level 1 first offense, right? So I said potential parent contact. And that was asked from many administrators after our last board meeting. For offense 2, detention and parent contact. Offense 3, 1 day in school and parent contact. And then for offense 4, mandatory MTSS, in-person parent contact, all of those pieces and parts. And they've divided up for high school very specifically because they would like to have a specific progression that doesn't have the same mix and match as the elementary and middle school would. And then you can see for a 5th offense of a level 1, then you can fill out an RED, or request to elevate discipline. But you can use anything from offense 2 and 3, obviously, for level 4. But you do have to have a mandatory MTSS. That's that piece and part. Okay, so for level 2, same original that we've seen over and over. And for progressions, we're looking at ISI 1 to 2, 2 to 3 days for second and third offenses, plus once you get to level 4, mandatory MTSS, in-person parent conference, and a development of a behavior contract. We can do virtual, of course, and we can change that language. So provocation, you can see, would like to be moved from a level 1 to 2, and that's the same for elementary and middle. But 2 differences for our high school learners is leaving school grounds without permission they would like to move to a level 2 offense. It's currently a level 1. So that's your child that perpetually decides to leave campus. They're just not going to be at school. And so they would like the option of some in-school suspension pieces and parts in their in-school suspension room so that they're on campus and they're learning and they're able to catch up on their work. And parking lot violations, which is only specific to our high school learners. A lot of things can happen in parking lots and a lot of inappropriate behaviors and unsafe driving and making poor choices sometimes. So they would like to have that move from a level 1 to a level 2 offense. And then for our level 3, you'll see that our recommended progressions start with an ISI or OSS of 1 to 3, offense number 2, 3 to 5, and 5 to 10 days, and then offense 4 elevates to request for discipline. So our middle and high school are looking at same progression and combinations for our level 3 offenses. And then you'll see that these are the same pieces and parts, except for endangerment or taking out the skateboarding on campus. Remember from that, skateboarding is not a crime, if I remember that bumper sticker we discussed last time. So you can see the tobacco, alcohol, and illicit drug violations. Everything we're recommending for revision, everything levels to that level 3. And then again, fights. And we will make sure to look at the word, the will, in there and change that. So this is all the same that you've seen from middle and elementary. And so we can progress through that piece and part to get to, I believe, Dr. Shaw's question about level 4. And here it is. So our level 4, and this is for elementary, middle, and high school revision. You can see that this is where that language of fighting for the first offense and second offense and possession and drugs and alcohol for the first and second offenses, that this piece and part now changes. This was the original. And what we'd like to recommend is if you have a first offense of a level 4 offense, because we've removed now, right, the fights and the illicit drug piece and alcohol usage, not sharing, not selling. That still sits at a level 4 because that's a whole different set of issues and concerns than use. But our level 4 offense is still 11 to 30 days of out of school suspension. That hasn't changed. That's exactly what's here for level 4, except for we're going to remove all the language about the fighting, the drugs, the alcohol, because now we're asking that sit at the level 3 progression. Of course, we'll still have the options of restorative conferences and circles, just like we would when we had that level 1 chart. What we're looking at for level 4 is giving administrators the option of holding part of those days in an abeyance with a behavior contract and parent contact for a level 1 offense. And so if, for example, a child is using marijuana and they're in the restroom and they give it to their neighbor and their neighbor uses the marijuana and hands it back to them, that's sharing. That's a level 4 offense. And so the administrator, if this is their first offense, could say, you know what, this is 11 days OSS, out of school suspension. It's a level 4. You shared marijuana. This is your first offense. You've really been handling your business beautifully this year. We don't want you to miss 30 days of school. We don't even want you to miss 11. We're going to go ahead and issue, let's say, 5 days out of school suspension and hold the other 6 of those days in an abeyance with a behavior contract that you will not use marijuana on campus. They have the right to search that child. at any point in time to check for drugs. Parents have been contacted. The child signs the abeyance contract. The parents are supportive of it. And so they could return back, say, after those 5 days on an abeyance contract for the rest of the 6 remaining for their 11-day suspension. And you'll see for first offenses, particularly, definitely for our elementary, and many times for our middle school and even for our high school learners. Take a kid who's just finally made the basketball team, for example, and all of a sudden they're going to miss all their practices and their first game. And that consequence of 11 days out could substantially make or break the future of whatever it is that they participate in because they can't be there, right? So the consequences of 11 days for first offense for some pieces and parts, administrators have asked for the option of holding part of that in abeyance. And right now, they have to call my office and we have a discussion, and that can absolutely stay. We didn't remove that piece in part, but we do want it to state that they have the option for the abeyance for that first offense, if need be. And if they don't utilize the abeyance, then they do go to a long-term hearing. This is a long-term suspension. And for the second offense, then you will be going to a hearing. Because level 4 is a serious business. And then simulated firearms, we'd like to move that piece of simulated firearms from a level 3 to a level 4. We've had enough instances where, as I had stated at the last school board meeting, a simulated firearm in that moment has the same emotional impact and has the same consequences for lockdowns, law enforcement, and those pieces and parts, threat assessments, as if it was a real gun in that moment, because it looks the same. And the other piece and part that we would put into the simulated firearms would just be very specific about what the toy version of it is, because that's been really significant. And some of those toys now sit in dangerous items, which is still level 3, but really now look like simulated firearms. So they would sit in level 4 as well, because that's school safety. That's very serious business, according to our stakeholders. So that concludes a very detailed red line revision recommendation for all of you this evening. Thank you for hanging in through these pieces and parts, but we thought it was important that you see what does exist currently and what the recommendations are. And so that ends the presentation and description piece of the revision recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Wormbrand. I have 2 questions, and I'll turn over to my governing board members for other questions or comments or feedback they have. On the abeyance, is that something that needs a principal or site administrator needs permission from the director of students relations or the regional superintendent to have an abeyance? You mentioned
yes. Yeah, level 4 offenses, we ask that that you're contacted, and they have to contact my office, because they have to set up with either myself or with my compliance liaison the hearing with the hearing officer if they're going to have a level 4 offense. So if they don't want to have the hearing piece because they want to have an abeyance, then that needs to be communicated, because all level 4 offenses per the code, and we wouldn't change this, would go to a hearing unless the administrator chooses to hold days in abeyance.
Okay, so that's through your office, not even through the regional superintendent.
Yeah, because they have to schedule the hearing through. And of course, if they call the regional superintendent and ask for a child to be on an abeyance, that's perfectly fine. Like, they have the same authority as I do. But then that also the second step is that does then have to be communicated to myself or my compliance liaison, just so we know that that's a thumbs up. And oftentimes, because I have a really consistent communication with our regional superintendents, that's really simple. They say, hey, talk to I went ahead and approved XYZ. Okay, thank you so much, or they'll text me, or it'll be on an email strand. So we have a pretty consistent communication in those pieces and parts.
And my second question is about truancy. I apologize if I missed it, but I know in level 2 offenses, you talked about leaving campus. But what if they're on campus and not in their classroom where they should be? That's come up in some emails and some other discussions and forums. Can you talk about how we're holding students accountable on that front?
So, interestingly enough, I thought that would come up with more folks in terms of the on-campus truancy being asked to elevate to something that might maybe a level 3 for a first offense or level 2. But what high school administrators and what the internal steering committee really focused on was, if that piece in part sits still at a level 1, they do have the option of that progressing to an in-school suspension piece. No one, even though it's a very frustrating situation, no one wanted to send kids home. They don't want to be in class, clearly. And so we didn't want to have them on a progression chart that would eventually lead to an out-of-school suspension piece immediately. Now, what high school said is, look, if after they've had one day of what we would call a reset in in-school suspension for that consistent truancy on campus, because that does sit in a level 1 option for high school within the progression chart. If one day of in-school suspension where they can meet with someone, go over what they're missing, make a plan for how they're going to handle the business, then they can request an elevation if it continues past the third offense to our office. What'll happen oftentimes with this consistent truancy piece is that after 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 times of a child being reminded that they need to be in a certain spot, that dialogue oftentimes can become defiant and disrespectful. And so you'll actually see a lot of requests of elevation for discipline for those types of interactions. And then that piece in part, we are looking at a level 3. So that's the 2 ways that the internal committee thought to address it. I was surprised, just given some feedback that I had received, that folks didn't want it at a much harsher consequence. But then when we spoke to parents, they didn't want it at a harsher consequence. And administrators were very tempered about making sure that at least they have the option of that one day in-house to reset. And then if that didn't work out, that they could have a request to elevate to level 2.
Thank you, Ms. Warrenbrand. Governing board members. Dr. Trujillo?
On the subject of let's take tardiness, because I think sometimes we get confused with absenteeism and tardiness, and we call everything truancy. Truancy is actually like you're habitually absent, you're disconnected from school, we don't see you, we're sending dropout prevention to try to get you re-engaged. I want to kind of focus on tardiness, because I think that's what has everybody frustrated, and what I call selective ditching, which is I'm on campus, and Dr. Shaw kind of pointed to that. I'm on campus, but I'm going to stay outside for my second lunch when I should be in a class, but my friends are outside second lunch. That's kind of the most common form of what we call ditching. And then, of course, you have the habitual lateness. I'm already on the campus. I'm outside. I'm hanging out with my friends. I'm on my phone. I'm slow walking into class. I walk in 5 or 10 minutes late. So those are the types of infractions that, as we read it now, as early as the 3rd time that I do that, okay, as a young person on any one of our high schools, I've already had a conference with my teacher and administrator, and then I did it again. I had a detention. My parent was contacted, and the behavior hasn't stopped. I go ahead and I do it again. As early as the 3rd time that I do that, I get at least a day of in-school intervention, right? Okay, I do it a 4th time. Now it's a larger situation where the MTSS team is looking at my decision making, what's going on. My parents have to come in for a meeting, and then there's a behavior contract. So that's the revision. Can I ask currently what is done now for this habitual lateness and kids coming in late or staying outside during selected periods?
There isn't. I mean, there's lunch detention as an option. There's no in-school suspension, reset, in-school intervention option. There's definitely lunch detention. There's parent contact. There's meeting with a school counselor. But yeah, that's been basically it. And so for kids, we found that habitually don't want to be in the classroom. They don't typically attend that lunch detention either. They choose to exclude themselves from that lunch detention as well, in which case it puts the administrator in a space where they feel the need to fill out a request to elevate discipline, because it looks like defiance then at that point, which means that you've gone from a level 1 offense, which was lunch detention, to now you've skipped to a 1 to 10 day suspension option, because the administrator doesn't have any recourse in the current code of conduct, because level 2 is the same consequences as a level 1.
Right.
And so you go from a lunch detention to all the way to 1 to 10 days. And then you can get that variability that Ms. Shaw spoke of at the last meeting, where someone feels it's defiance and disrespect, and now a child's out for 4 or 5 days for out of school suspension because they are continually not going to class, and then they don't attend the lunch detention. So there's a very quick escalation and no progression whatsoever of an in-school option at all currently.
That's exactly the point I wanted you to make, that these revisions shut the door on all that it locks you in to a progression only to the next level. And then it has very structured requirements for contact. So I think also, kind of having been in this situation, I know what a nightmare it is on a large high school campus to try to get all of the young people, our students, in on time. The lunch detention also presents a showdown, and it becomes how far do I want to go over a young person coming in late? Now it's a whole different ball game. I want to keep the kid in school. I want them connected to classes, but I have a very public rejection of the consequence. So it's almost like I have no choice as the administrator, and I have to move it to the next level. So I'm glad that this recommended revision is going to take us away from that space. It's all very, very clear what happens: first offense, second offense, the parent contact requirement, the MTSS requirement, the plan. And instead of automatically shooting it over to defiance, I'm actually just locked in as a level 1 offense, and I'm only able to go into level 2. Which closes that door of shooting off into other areas. So appreciate you making that distinction.
Thank you.
Mr. Romero, and then Ms. Luna Rose.
So on our current code, I guess keep continuing on tardiness, is there like a certain time limit for tardy versus being absent? Like if they come in 10 minutes late, or if they come in halfway through the class?
So there's a lot of variability when you talk about tardies, but tardy is, after the bell. Occasionally, administrators will do a sweep of hallways, and when that sweep is conducted, they'll say, we have a grace because the bells are a little bit off of a couple minutes, but there isn't currently in the code a distinction of 5 minutes to 25 to 30. That does not currently sit in the code of conduct. After the bell rings, that's what we would typically consider late, unless the site administrator has asked for a 3-minute grace for a particular reason on campus for that day, or bells or schedules or something of that nature. But nothing currently sits in the code that makes that distinction.
Okay, sounds like to me, well, it sounds like mostly from the campuses that I visited, being in between halls, the 3 to 5 minutes, I can understand that to an extent. I didn't have that leniency growing up when I was in high school, but, when a student comes in 20, 30 minutes after the teacher's been doing a lesson, and now it's a disruption to the class, this person's missed 20 minutes or more of instruction, and now that individual's behind on what the lesson's about. I think it puts a little bit of a strain on the teacher also. I don't know if anything was mentioned at all in any of the forums that you dealt with, and that is an issue. I just seen from some of the people I have talked to and being on some campuses, I see that as an issue. And then when they're not in class, that lends to them being in the bathroom with the drugs or the different things of that nature. If they're not in class, then they're, are they behind, the stadium or what's going on and where are they at? Because if they're not in class, that's, I think, an option for them to do bad things.
Mm-hmm. And what stakeholders have brought up is, yes, the impact to the education within the classroom, but more frequently we heard about what's occurring when they're not in class, right? Not the 3 to 5 minutes, but the 20 to 30. And so that is the piece and part that we're hoping that this progression model can address as well. Because exactly to your point, sir, what's happening in that time period is what sits within our levels, like disruption, that truancy piece, drugs, alcohol, fights. So we're hoping to address that piece and part in that way. And in terms of a time limit of when they're just absent and when they're tardy, that definitely, that is a very good point, right? Like if they come the last 2 minutes of class, typically kids will have to come with a slip if they're late to a certain point and go back to the office. What are our high schools learners doing if they're 25 minutes late? Probably not walking themselves to the office to get the slip and come back. And so that's where many a violation can occur, which is overall campus safety. But there isn't a distinction between those pieces and parts. It more addresses the behaviors that are happening while they're not in the classroom, typically.
And is that something that we can have a little bit of conversation on that? Or I don't know if other school districts are doing things like that. I'm just, again, if we're doing all this work right now to look at, all the issues.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Trujillo, did you want to address that?
I think we can add some options for when we come back. I know that other districts working with, at least in secondary, at least in my former district, we had a 15-minute, after 15 minutes in a 54-minute period, you were considered absent. And that had to do more with instructional minutes and requirements for credit. So I don't think it would hurt to kind of define, what that means, because there are legit times. I think we're also forgetting about excused tardies. There are times where parents legitimately have their kids out and there's doctor's appointments and things. And so that becomes a crucial difference, an unexcused absence versus an excused absence versus an excused tardy. So I think it would do us well to kind of define what it looks like time-wise within a period.
Okay. I'm literally putting that down as a distinction to add language within the tardy piece and part. And I'll work with stakeholder folks to look at it. Like all of the changes in actual language, I don't make it up out of my head. We look at what's very standard throughout the state. So we will for sure look at that piece and part.
It's also nuanced too. It would probably be like looking at first period arrivals. Because then you get into, and then this is just my former high school administrator life, once our students step foot on the campus, they really have no business being 15 minutes late to like third period, fourth period. So we always kind of treated first period arrivals a little differently because, you're dealing with traffic and appointments and things like that.
Yes.
So I would just say let's kind of work with our team on that by the time we come back next week. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, and I will make a note for the first period piece and part because as a parent, I completely understand that first period is not the same as the rest of the class periods. Yes.
Ms. Luna Rose, go ahead.
Thank you. And maybe this is more of a question for Dr. Trujillo, but as I'm looking at, it's kind of a funky question. I'm looking at other violations of school policies, parking lot violations due to students driving recklessly, putting people in danger, and escalating it from 1 to 2. And, you know, obviously I've read the description, but if they violate that, does the school or the district in general have, like, can the district or the school take away their driver's license or their driving privileges? Probably not, but I'm kind of curious on where's the law in that, and the school district authority versus parent authority versus the law.
Yeah, and I'll turn to Mr. Ross here on this one. I can tell you my initial read is like we're not the DMV, you know, we couldn't take somebody's license or anything like that, but we can address behaviors, right? Reckless driving. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. The other thing I would add to that is that the district could, if it wanted to, revoke parking privileges on its campus. And one of the things in the current code, and I'm not sure if it's still there, but removal of privileges is one of the lower level consequences that an administrator can provide. When I was in high school, we had a contract for the parking, and you know I had to behave myself in the parking lot with my little moped, or they would have taken away my parking pass. I don't know if our schools do that, but that is something within your authority. Taking a license would not be.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is, I mean, I pretty much figured, but and maybe just because it's a presentation, but can we have something in there that says, you know, that we, because, you know, if a parent's relying on their child to drive themselves to school because they're working, and then they do something that we're revoking, the school is revoking the pass, then I would like that to be explicitly said, so it can be referred to without any hassle. Or minimize the hassle, I guess. Because, you know, high school parking lots, when I go and pick up my daughter, they can be a little nutty. So I just, you know, I think about that as I'm trying to do because there's still parent pickup too. So sometimes you don't know if, you know, I've been cut off personally by some kids coming out of the parking lot. So we can just make sure that, you know, we're being safe, especially in a few of our schools that, you know, I know I can think of Tucson High as one with the neighborhood right behind it. So that's the only question I had, or the only statement I had. Thank you. But also, Mr. Wilmer, thank you so much for your work on this. This is really detailed, and I know it's been a long time and a lot of work. So I just wanted to thank you for your consistency on this project.
Thank you. It is, as I always say, a labor of love. I've added that piece for our reminders that we'll place particularly in the high school section. And just not to open up a whole other can, but there is a reminder when we talk about privileges of bus privileges as well. So we were going to, in meeting with transportation, do a reminder also in the code as we would with these parking privileges, that the bus is also a privileged piece in part, although we don't want to take transportation away from kiddos, but that is, you can be bus suspended and it's not exclusionary for the school day. It's a privilege, so.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you. In regards to Ms. Luna Rose's question about parking violations, yeah, could you let us know if students have to be issued a parking pass to park on campus? And if so, I think that would be a great way to deal with infractions that happen in our parking lot. I'm pretty sure I did it at my high school. And like, I think that they also use like tire boots. I don't know if we can do that, but like, can we do that?
I was just talking with Director Helms. He would love it. I mean, I think it solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
I think it would be a great thing, you know, to register your vehicle. We know what the license plate is, the make, the model. I think it would be great. I think it's something we can definitely add in.
Okay, yeah, I think that would really be helpful for our staff. And then also, I touched base on this like a few meetings ago, but are we moving on having students, one, at the beginning of the year, go through each and every word of this, a code of conduct, as it's relevant to their grade, and then also sign that they have read it, they understand it, that they will abide by it? Because I think that will be helpful. So, they know the consequences up front of any of their actions.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Board Member Sean. I think at the top of the program, Ms. Warmbrand did a great job kind of talking about what it's going to look like for secondary. So I'll start with secondary, what it'll look like in your middle schools and high schools. We're going to go through those common classes that all of the grade levels have: English language arts, social studies, or either one of the two. And those teachers will give some classroom presentations that we will craft and make sure that we develop out of student relations, so that there can be classroom level presentations on the changes to the code of conduct. We, of course, would have to train our principals and our staff to make sure we go through it and they cover everything, so that we could get to a signature page requirement. Elementary looks a little bit different, and I think that's because of the age difference. That's where we're talking more to parents. And of course, with students, we're meeting them at their level, and we're doing things more like presentations, assemblies, so that groups of students understand what some of the changes are. Also, we have the code of conduct that is going to be digital. It's going to be available on the district webpage. You can actually download it, and it's actually pretty phone friendly. You can do searches and things for different violations. And then we'll have a limited number of hard copies for those that don't have the access to technology that'll be available in offices. One of the things that I want to be working with our registration team as we look at registration processes across the district is to kind of do what other districts do. You make the signature page that you understand the code of conduct and all of its policies. You make it one of the required pages in the registration packet. That it doesn't stop you from getting there the first day of school. We would still bring you in first day, but at least we follow up and we say, hey, listen, you haven't gotten us your code of conduct page back. Similar to what we do with free and reduced lunch paperwork, what we do with emergency contacts, immunizations, that'll help systematize the requirement that you're talking about.
Right. But if they do it while they're registering, they probably won't be looking through, or at least the student won't be looking through the code of conduct. And so,
well, we obviously would collect it after it's distributed and after kids had their presentations, and then it would be housed in the cumulative file. And then it would become a part of the registration paperwork. We can also assign, when you come in and you register your student, you pick up a code of conduct booklet, or you get the link if you prefer to do it. And then we inform you, hey, listen, you owe us the signature page. We're going to be following up at some point throughout the year. So there's ways that we can do it that won't pressure our parents. And that's why I want to be clear, if we establish it as a registration paperwork, it's not to stop a parent from starting school.
Yeah.
Right? So that way they don't feel like, oh, I just got to sign off on it.
And then another question, have we made any changes yet to the substance abuse workshop? Because I know many people have said that it's ineffective, and so are we making progress on that, or looking around to different agencies who can handle some of that influx with the substance abuse workshop, or are we just eliminating it? Because I did still see it on these revisions.
So we're developing the code of conduct. We're dealing with the language right now, but whether or not the code of conduct gets passed or not, that's still going to happen. Like, we are still going to be working with agencies to see who can come in and do a more structured curriculum for our drug and alcohol awareness groups. I spoke of the workload of our counselors and our social workers last time, and we realized that there's too much on their plate right now.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Ekstrom.
I just would like to say thank you for this work, and I think it's important for this document to be evolving. So I do support those quarterly community forums. I think that's important, and just to get feedback from teachers, principals, parents is something that we should probably be doing.
All right, seeing no further questions or feedback, Ms. Warmbrand, I think the floor is still yours on the PIAs, correct? Are we going to be discussing those tonight? Or those are available just for us to review?
The PIA is available just for your review because the PIA just contains a lot of the same information that Ms. Warmbrand went through in a very, very detailed way. And it's available for your review and for the public as well.
Great. All right, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Warmbrand, for your time this evening. Enjoy the rest of your vacation.
Always a pleasure. And if I may indulge you once, the boys did beautifully. They represented TUSD beautifully. They were the highest ranked kids in Arizona at the national competition and the highest ranked Hispanic students as well. So they held it down for TUSD in Arizona as a whole. So there we go. So I'll end on that note. Thank you all so much.
These
for
are your
thoughtful
Wakefield
questions.
middle schoolers and your soon-to-be Tucson High freshmen who are competing nationally in the geography and history bees.
Yes.
Yes,
So they
great job
represented.
to everyone.
Thank you, Wakefield Knights, Tucson High Badgers represented at the national level. So we appreciate you. Thank you for everything. I have my list of everything we talked about, and you'll see those changes ASAP. And I'll see you next week in person. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Great. Safe travels.
Yep, for sure.
Great. And so do you want to do a 5-minute quick break before we move on to the our next topic, which is going to be another big one, our bond election? Yes. All right. I'm seeing some nodding. So we'll do a quick bathroom break and refreshment break, and we'll be back in approximately 5 minutes.
After all this time, I've got to say thank you for meeting with Dolores and myself. I appreciate that. Another year is coming, but it's hoping.
My daughter's in camp, so not just the violins.
Some of the seniors that just graduated out, most of they were sixth graders.
That's great.
It's one of the fun things about my job. I like to tell the seniors, say, remember when we first met in the sixth grade, remember that sometimes the freshers pay us. You're not like that anymore. That was then, this is now.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting back to order. We still have a lot on our agenda tonight. I'll make sure we have the energy to continue the robust discussions that we've been having so far. So next on our agenda is item 3.2, consideration for calling a special bond election on November 7, 2023. Dr. Trujillo.
Yes, President Shaw, members of the governing board. As the governing board takes up probably the most important question of the year, we wanted to make sure that as an administrative team, that we meet our obligation not only to this governing body, but to our parents, our employees, and the general public and the voters ultimately, in terms of giving all the information necessary for our board to make a decision. So tonight, we will, as an extension of our last presentation, where you got to hear from the pollsters in terms of current trends and attitudes and opinions about a potential bond effort, you got a 30,000-foot overview of a potential bond package. Tonight, we're going to be welcoming our guests from Stifel Public Finance. That will be very, very clear in the information regarding debt service schedules and interest rates on a potential bond package. We'll also get into the details of a comprehensive school-by-school and building-by-building potential bond package for your consideration. And then, of course, our Chief Financial Officer will communicate the total costs associated with potentially going out for a special election in the fall of 2023. So to go ahead and get things started, I'm going to turn it over. Are we going to begin with Stifel? Okay, or would you like to kick things off, Mr. Hernandez? Okay. I'd like to welcome our guest from Stifel to take the podium first, and Randy Stein, a longtime partner we've been working with from Stifel for many, many years. She will be taking us through tonight's presentation. Hello, Randy. Good to see you again, albeit virtually. Can you hear us?
$4.70 a month for 12 cents.
Testing. Randy, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome. Good to see you again. And I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off.
Great. Well, thank you, members of the governing board and Dr. Trujillo. We've been asked to present to you sort of the mechanics of how a bond election would work and what that would mean vis-a-vis property tax rates. And so that is the presentation before you. And if we can turn to page 3. I'm the fun one at the party. No presentation about a possible bond election in the state of Arizona is complete without a discussion about property values in the jurisdiction. And so what we have before you here is a history of the property valuation in the Tucson Unified School District. You will note that for each year there are 2 bars because, yes, in fact, there are 2 property values that are assigned by the county assessor. The blue bar is the value that is the full cash assessed value. That is the value that's used for determining bonding capacity. The red bar you can see is lower. That is a limited assessed property value, and that's the value against which property taxes are levied. I'll also point out to you here that you can see, starting at about fiscal 18, the district has been realizing actually very steady growth over the next several years. If you look to the left of the chart, you see, in fact, that there were some declines in a few of those years of the property value in the district. And what you're seeing is the ramifications of the market downturn that happened in 2008 2008 and 2009. And in fact, the property valuation system in Arizona lags. And so you do see that those negative numbers going into fiscal 15, and then very slowly starting to recover as you move into fiscal 16 and 17. At the top of the page are averages. I'm going to point out to you the 10-year average on the far right-hand side at the top, that 3.11. This is a significant number because the statute prescribes what kind of property value growth can be assumed for a school district in a voter pamphlet. And in your case, it's that 3.11%, and you will see that on a later page. I will take a breath here for a second and see if there are any questions on the property value in the district. Great. On the next page, again, a history. This, though, is of property tax rates in the school district. The big orange bar is the primary property tax rate. To a large extent, that is really not controlled by the district. That's part of the school funding formula. There are a few add-on pieces, and in fact, your school district does have a couple of those add-on pieces. The light blue bar is the secondary property tax rate that is associated with the bonds that are currently outstanding in the district, and you can see that that has been declining over time. And then the green line is just the combination of the two. On the next page is an overview of the bonding capacity in the school district. This, in fact, is the maximum amount of bonds that this school district could have outstanding at the time of issuing bonds. Doesn't mean that you have to, but this, in fact, is your limit. I'll first draw your attention to the right-hand side. In August of the third Monday in August of 2023, the county board of supervisor will adopt the new property values for fiscal 24. At that time, the school district's bonding capacity will be $947 million. Where we sit right now, the bonding capacity of the district is $807 million. So there are two things that are going to happen between now and that third Monday in August that are going to increase that bonding capacity. The line that says less outstanding Class B bonds. Currently, the outstanding Class B bonds of the district are $88 million. On July 1 of 2023, the district will make a bond payment, and the bonds outstanding will go down to $75 million. At that time, bonding capacity will increase. So as bonds get paid off, bonding capacity is regained. And then the second thing that will happen is the property values for fiscal 24 will be adopted by the county board of supervisors. So at that time, the bonding capacity of the district will increase from $821 million to $947 million. Any questions related to bonding capacity? This is obviously not a confining issue for this school district. The bonding capacity is quite substantial, and certainly compared to the amount of bonds outstanding, which is not always the case in all school districts across the state.
I have a question, Ms. Stein. On the previous slide, what does that rate mean exactly? So when you have a value, so 5.4651.
Okay, so that is the primary property tax associated with the Tucson Unified School District in the current fiscal year. I'm not sure why anybody necessarily would be, but if you pay close attention to a property tax bill, property taxes are levied in Arizona by multiple jurisdictions, not just the school district, but cities, towns, counties, special districts, community college districts. And on that bill, it will be identified as the primary property tax rate associated with the Unified School District. Again, most of that rate is intricately tied to the school funding formula in the state of Arizona. There's a qualifying tax rate, and almost all school districts, including this one, levies that qualifying tax rate every year as part of the regular guaranteed funding structure set out in statute. I hope that answered your question.
Partly. So what does the value actually mean? So you go to the top of that column, 5.9173. What does that value mean? What does 5.9173 mean for
So
someone?
that is $5.92 per $100 of assessed valuation. And what that means is a house that is valued for tax purposes at $100,000. It has an assessment ratio applied to it, and then the tax rate is applied against each $100 of assessed valuation. This is a tax liability on that $100,000 house of $591.
Mr. Romero, go ahead.
So what is the, on the less outstanding Class B bond? Is that a bond we currently have out?
It is. And actually, if we go to page 7, and we can go back, these are the current bonds of the Tucson Unified School District that are currently outstanding. You've got 3 series of bonds that are outstanding. The first series on the left was issued in 2011. And you can see that those bonds will be paid off in approximately a year. There will be a principal payment on July 1, 23, and then the final principal payment for those bonds on July 1, 24. In the middle, there was bonds that were issued in 2016. Those are scheduled to pay off on July 1, 2027. And the most recent series of bonds that have been issued were issued in December of 2017 and are scheduled to pay off in 2030. So the district currently has 3 series of bonds outstanding and currently has no authorization to issue additional school improvement bonds.
Thank you.
And then I will ask you to back up to page 6, thank you, which is just another look at the property value in the district by the various classes of property. It is quite common that the 2 most prevalent classes of property in a school district across the state would be that residential classification as well as the commercial and industrial classification. In this situation, you're about 69% residential. That's the combination of owner occupied as well as rental residential, and about 28% of the property in the school district is in the commercial and industrial category. And this makes up the assessed property value in the district. And then on page 8, page 8 actually is just picks up on what we saw on page 7 with the current series of bonds that are outstanding. This is a graph form. When you combine each of those series of bonds, we see the blue bar is the amount of principal that will be paid off in each fiscal year, and the red piece on top of it is the amount of interest that will be paid in each fiscal year. So the 2 together is the current debt service obligation of the school district. And that debt service obligation is pretty consistent through fiscal 27. But you can see that amount drops off pretty substantially starting in fiscal 28. We have talked about that 1 series of bonds paying off, but also each year additional principal for the other 2 series will be paying off. And that's the reason that debt service is dropping down at this point. And then if we're ready, we've been I understand that There's been a recommendation to, or from a committee of the governing board with respect to a potential bond election in November of 2023. And that amount was a bond authorization of $480 million. And if you'll go to page 10, we can start looking at how that works and what that will mean. These columns are numbered. I hope you can see them. I'm going to grab glasses so we can assure that I can see them. And that first column is just the fiscal year that we are talking about. That second column is the assessed valuation of the district. And I indicated to you that the statute prescribes the basis by which that assessed value can grow over time for purposes of a bond election. And that's what you see in column 3. I pointed out to you that 3.11 number. Statute says your property value can grow by the 10-year average, the prior 10-year average for 5 years. So you see that 3.11 for 5 years. And then the requirement going out is that it be 20% of that. So you can see the growth drops down to 0.62%. This doesn't mean that is how your property value will necessarily grow, but that is the assumption that's used for purposes of putting together a bond ballot question. In columns 4 and 5, this is the bonds that are currently outstanding in the district. The debt service is identified in column 4. We talked about that debt service being relatively consistent through fiscal 27, approximately $14, $15, $16, $17 million a year, and then dropping down pretty substantially to just over $6 million for the 3 years following. And then column 5 is the estimated tax rate associated with those bonds that are already outstanding. The tax rate for the district on the bond program right now, fiscal 23, is 45 cents per $100 of assessed value. And in fiscal 24, we're expecting a tax rate of approximately 36 cents and just over 40 cents for the next couple of years. So that's all identified in column 5. And then we get to what would a $480 million bond program look like. There's nothing particularly magical about this configuration, but this has been set up with 3 series of bond sales. The district would be unlikely. It would not be likely that you would be interested in selling $480 million worth of bonds all at one time. That would be a lot of projects to deploy at one time. Federal regulations would ask that you expect to spend that money in 3 years. So that seems like it would be a little bit more than you'd want to manage. So this is set up with series of bond sales every 2 years. The first sale being $150 million. And the second sale again being $150 million, and then a third sale in 2028 of $180 million. Again, nothing magical. Scenarios can be changed, and just because this would be a possible scenario that you would be expecting now, once the bond is authorized by your voters in November, you may wind up doing it differently than what is laid out in this schedule, but we do need to look at some sort of schedule here. So this is set up with 3 different bond sales. The whole thing comes together in columns 12 and 13 associated with all 3 bond sales, the additional debt service, and then the additional tax rate associated with only the $480 million program. At the bottom of column 13 is a estimated average annual tax rate associated with just the bond program for the 2023 ballot. So that's 69 cents. And Again, that's just the 480 million. If you look to column 15, that's the combined tax rate by year for the bonds that are currently outstanding. So column 5 plus column 13 is going to give you the tax rate found in column 15. Again, the current bond tax rate for the district is 45 cents per $100 of assessed value. We're expecting it to go down to 36 cents for fiscal 24. A successful bond program where the first sale is in March of 2024 would be reflected on the tax rate for the first time in fiscal year 25. And you see that fiscal year 25 tax rate going up to 79 cents and holding there for the next several years. What will change that tax rate from the projected to the actual is how the property value actually grows over time and the precise configuration of the bond sales. You know, it may be that ultimately you wound up doing 4 sales when at this point we were only estimating 3. There may be lag time in getting your projects or other projects have taken precedence. So that is what is going to change column 15 when it comes to reality versus what we are estimating at this point. I'm going to stop. There's a lot of small numbers and a lot of information on this page. So I will stop and see what kind of questions I can answer.
So just real quick, going back to those outstanding Class B bonds, and we're showing how they're going on down. And then we looked at breaking out, say, this bond into 3 different areas. I don't know where I put that. So like 2024, 2026, 2028. So as a taxpayer, say it passes, does a taxpayer pay for that 480 million, starting 2024, or does that we take out the first 150, and then the second, and then the third, the last one of 180, or 180. So I see like the other class ones are going down. Do they stagger as far as the tax rate for the taxpayer?
And that's, there's a couple reasons to spread out the selling of the bonds once they've been authorized. And yes, it is to spread out the tax impact. Bond authorizations for school districts in Arizona are good for 10 years. So bonds that are approved by voters in November of 2023 could be issued as late as November of 2033. So it's contemplated that a bond program is not just associated with a single year, that there are capital plans associated with it and dealing with some longer term needs. And it's a little bit hard to hear from the governing board room, but I believe that's what you were talking about, was how the bond program would be phased, again, to give the district the ability to implement the projects, to be able to construct the projects over time, and to gauge the impact on the taxpayers.
Yeah, I guess that was the burden on the impact of the taxpayer. So if they're spread out as the other bonds are leaving, it's not as much of a strain on the taxpayer, because it's, it might be a little bit of a peak in the beginning, but it'll kind of mellow out as the other bonds go away.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can, and actually, if we focus a little bit on column 13, you can really see that happening, that in the first few years, we've attempted to keep that tax rate lower, because you do have bonds outstanding already. And as those bonds are paying off more substantially starting in fiscal 28, you can see that the added tax rate associated with the potential 480 million on that.
Your last
To try
sentence
and
cut
keep
off.
that
Ms.
tax
Stein, can you
rate
repeat that?
Just looking at column 13, those first few years, 37 cents, 36 cents, and 42 cents. And as your existing bonds are paying off more substantially, we can add more tax rate for the new bond program. And in column 15, the estimated tax rate is staying at that 79 cents. So as one is paying off, we're adding some of the tax rate from the new program to keep the overall bond tax rate steady at that 79-cent level.
All right, Ms. Stein, I think we're good to move forward.
Yes. Just a couple more pages. There's a lot of notes on page 11. These are just some of the assumptions that we've been using. You can see in the right-hand box the configuration of these three bond sales. You can also see we've also identified the interest rate that we're assuming. Obviously, once the election is successful and you went to sell bonds, the estimated interest rate is not the level at which you sell. You sell at current market conditions. We believe that we've used a conservative interest rate as we'd rather be able to sell bonds at a lower interest rate than what was identified in the pamphlet than the other way around. The next page is just a table that would be included in the voter information pamphlet to identify the impact of the bond program on various properties. The average residential property value on the left-hand side in the district right now is approximately $183,000. So this shows the tax impact based on that average tax rate to a homeowner with an average value home. So that's approximately $125 a year and approximately $10 a month. We also include the estimates for a $100,000 house. That's just, the math is kind of easy for people to if you've got a $200,000 house or a $300,000 house, the math is easy. So that's a good reference point. Similar information about the average commercial property and also the average agricultural and vacant property. So this is just a table that would be included in that voter information pamphlet. So I wanted to give you a look at how that works, as well as a schedule that's similar to the debt service schedule we were previously looking at. And that really is the information that we have for you. We've got our contact information. We're worried that we're actually a little bit worried that your meeting agenda is not dense enough tonight. So if you go to the next page, we've supplied 4 pages of information associated with bonds and override elections. So if you just need a little bit more of a heavy dose this evening, we've got that information in the back of your packet here. This is some, all kidding aside, this is some good information about bonds and how voter pamphlets work for when you are ready to be doing that. Information about the IRS and how the feds require you to spend money and what the state requires. So there's a lot of information there for you.
Thank you, Ms. Stein. I was remiss at the beginning of this presentation to get more of an introduction from you and your firm, Stifel. I don't think we've heard of this firm before. Can you tell me more or tell us more about what you do?
Certainly. Thank you. Yes, I apologize for that. My name is Randy Stein, and I am a managing director with Stifel. We have actually worked with the school district in the past on various bond issues. We are a financial services firm. We do underwriting and financial advisory work, mostly for government jurisdictions. While there are offices of our firm nationwide, we're located in Arizona, and we work with primarily Arizona issuers. So most of our clients are school districts, cities, towns, and counties in the state of Arizona.
Great, thank you. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues for questions, but can we go back to the slide that had the effects on I think it's slide 12, had the effects for our colleagues, our community members here. So the average for a $480 million bond with all the things that you can do throughout our district, the average cost for a homeowner will be about $126 a year. Am I reading that correctly?
That is correct, yes.
And so if we are doing like a lesser bond package, for example, say we do a $200,000 bond package or $240,000 bond package instead of $480, then we would just cut that in half pretty much. I mean, I know we get more complicated with debt servicing and how this gets used, but if we're trying to like vet and kind of decide what is going to be palatable to the voters who will be paying the tax and paying this amount, is that how we can estimate the cost to homeowners?
So the answer is generally yes. Generally, I mean, that's not going to be precise, but yes, that's the right concept that it can be interpolated. If you'll go back to the debt service slide, one more, thank you. A lot of it is in the configuration of the bond sales. And to the degree that changes, this sort of a back of the envelope interpolation would change as well. But yes, generally, if you're talking about a $240 million bond program as opposed to a 480, it's going to be approximately half.
So for an investment of about $126 on average for all the community members in TUSD, we can modernize over 90 campuses and facilities around our district. All right. Mr. Romero.
Kind of piggybacking on Dr. Shaw's question on the residential property. So understanding that it's just going by the average, $182,994 property value at 125.86. Currently, without a bond on it right now, for that average house property value, what is our current estimated average annual currently without the bond? I'm just trying to find out the difference in from what they're paying, what we're paying now, to what we would be paying in the future.
I'm sorry, if that's a question, I am having difficulty hearing it.
How about now? I don't know if I'm too close to the mic or not. So I just wanted to find out what the difference would be from currently what it is now to if we did accept this bond, what the taxpayers are paying for the average household of $182,994,000, just to find out what that difference is currently to proposed.
So your current, and we're kind of mixing tax rates here, but your current bond tax rate, I think we were looking at 45 cents. So if you can indulge me with a $200,000 house, as opposed to 182, we're talking about approximately $90 per year. If we go back to two more slides, In column 15, the maximum tax rate for both the bonds that are currently outstanding as well as the proposed program is 79 cents. So on a $200,000 house, we're talking approximately $160 as opposed to $90. And, this is very broad. All these numbers will change, year after year. The average value house will change. But I think that's generally the magnitude of it. Your homeowner's right. Someone with an average value house, approximately $200,000, is paying approximately $90 now. The maximum tax rate that we're seeing in column 15 is 79, so about 160, so a difference of $70.
Okay, thank you.
And that's, yeah, and that it's not exactly precise, but that makes sense when we're talking about an average tax rate for the new bond program right at 70 cents. So 60, just shy of 69 cents.
Perfect.
Ms. Stein, do we know how this compares to other school districts, preferably in our region, but in the state, in terms of what kind of bond costs they have for their taxpayers?
That's a great question. And bond tax rates in the state of Arizona vary pretty widely. There are some school districts that can support a bond program with a 20-cent tax rate. And there are other school districts that support bond programs with tax rates in excess of $2.
Any other questions, governing board members? Ms. Stein, thank you for this presentation. I love the data and numbers, and I think it was very clear and informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, President Shaw, continuing on. Now let's take a little bit more of a deeper dive into what our bond package looks like. I want to welcome our Director for Planning Services, Mr. Bryant Nodine, who's been working diligently on this potential package. Mr. Nodine.
Dr. Roger Shaw, members. Dr. Ravishah, members of the board, Dr. Trujillo, council. We wanted to give you that overview of our financial situation so you could see where we were in terms of bonding capacity, which is quite a bit, and where we were in terms of indebtedness, which is not very much because our last bond was 2004. So we thought that would be a good way to start the presentation. Go ahead to the next slide. What I wanted to show you here was how we came up with the bond program. Basically, what we did is we've been tracking facility conditions in the district for years with the Facility Condition Index. And so we started out with what we presented to you in January, the capital needs, and that was based on trying to get all of our schools up to an adequate level, which is a Facility Condition Index of 3, which isn't, there's a 4 and a 5 as well. 5 is like new. So we wanted to move everything up to a facility condition of 3. And so that handled deficiencies in the district. Then we also wanted to look at what do we need to do to improve learning. Now, handling deficiencies improves learning. Okay, HVAC works, the paint is good and not coming off the walls, we don't have tiles that are stained and so on. Those things help with education. They help people be engaged in our schools. But we also wanted to look at other ways that we could enhance learning. And so what we did is we went to fine arts, we went to the principals, we went to interscholastics, we went to career and tech education, and we went and talked to Richard Sanchez, who's handling middle school revitalization. And we talked also to curriculum department and said, what do you need in terms of facilities, in terms of a bond, to really enhance learning? And so we added those things into that capital package that you saw previously. And then we did the survey that you heard the results of. And based on that, we started to look at how do we structure this bond? How do we create the terminology for this bond? And so we started using that public survey to say, this is how the bond package is going to look. Now, we took all of that, including the survey and the financial impacts that you just heard, to the Bond Exploratory Committee and presented everything to them to get a recommendation. So I want to say you have a more detailed description in your packet of that meeting where they made a consensus. But basically, they were unanimous for a bond. There was no discussion there. The question was how much bond? And so there was some discussion there on size. What's the size of the bond? Some of the members of the committee felt like a lower bond amount would be better because when it goes lower, there's less potential for an organized opposition. And that was really the main reason. It's not that we don't need it, it's we want to be successful in passing it. And then ultimately, the majority and finally consensus was that we should go for the $450 million bond. And that's because of the reason, some of the reasons stated. We have a lot of capacity. Where our bonded indebtedness isn't much, and especially when you compare it with other districts. Our last bond was 2004, and the need that you saw in the capital plan, just the basic need to get things adequate, was very high. So those are the reasons the committee recommended by consensus that we go with the $480 million bond. Now what I'd like to do is look at what that bond looks like. Next one. So it's broken into 5 different categories. I'll go through each one individually. Repairs and upgrades to existing facilities, that's the bulk of it. As you saw in January, that's what we really need. New air conditioning systems, roofs, floors, plumbing, restrooms, looking at the fields and the parking areas, the areas outside in the sites, making sure, as was talked about, that we replace aging furniture. And it's not just because it's old, but also it doesn't fit teaching methods now. It's hard to combine the desks together and make it work. And we're getting into more project-based and more teaming in the instruction. And then we wanted to modernize the systems because they're going to be more energy efficient, and they're also going to be less expensive year to year to maintain. So that will save us money in the long run. So that's repairs and upgrades to existing facilities. The next thing is improvements to classrooms and learning spaces. And that's what I talked about. Go ahead, Gene. Yeah, that's what I talked about, where we're talking about auto shops, welding shops, science labs, project labs. Those are specific. They aren't just upgrades. They aren't just renovations. Those require specific equipment, and they're more specialized, and so we wanted to call those out separately. And also, we wanted to do the same thing for fine arts. And basically, Catalina is a great example of where we want to be in terms of a high school auditorium. But even it has some things that are needed. And so we want to move things toward the Catalina quality. And then finally, there are schools, actually go back one. There are schools where we've had portables in those schools for years, and we need to figure out if we are going to need those in the future, and if we do, it's time to replace them. And so we work that into it. And so we have a handful of schools at least where we're looking at replacing portables with permanent structures. And the next slide. Okay, so now we get down to health, security, and safety. And basically what we're looking at there is cameras, lockdown systems, access control, fencing, gates, alarms, emergency lighting. Those kinds of things go into the security and safety. And virtually every school is getting those. Some schools have some of those already, but we're looking at getting it into every school. And then the other thing is looking at how we can not just take care of security, but also health by upgrading all of our health offices so they have equipment and furnishings that can be used to separate people who are quarantined, basically separate people from the rest of the students and from staff and so on, so that we can really protect the health of our students and staff. And then the next thing is access to updated technology. What we're doing there is creating classrooms where there are interactive panels, and everybody has access to those interactive panels, and the students and the teachers have devices that are appropriate for their level of learning, going from like a tablet device, iPad, up to Chrome, up to a Windows device, depending on their level of keyboarding and level of expertise with applications. So that's really what we're looking for, to create an interactive learning environment where everybody can share the knowledge that they have easily. And then the last one is transportation and support vehicles. Now this comes in last, but it's important to realize we transport over 12,000 students. Well, we route over 12,000 students every day. And this is amazing to me, at least. We have 16,000 miles of bus travel every day to transport students. So they wear out. They get old, they go past their useful life, and they have to be replaced. And when we replace them, we want to replace them with something that's fuel efficient, something that's got good air conditioning, and is reliable and safe. So that's what we're looking for in transportation. Now, going on to the next slide, we wanted to, and I know this is a little bit hard to read, but you do have it in your packet. We wanted to kind of show you what it looks like on a school-by-school basis. Now, the original slideshow that I had here wasn't as good as the final layout that we were able to put together from our bond program. So that's why I moved it to this one. We have every elementary school, middle school, and high school has a listing of what's available, what the projects are that are being proposed. And I'm giving you examples of one of each of those. So let's take Davis. Davis, if you look at repairs and upgrades to existing facilities, you'll see that those things repeat quite a bit, and they're what I talked about earlier, including putting in some sunshade, some shades on the exterior for like the courts or playgrounds and so on. And then the next thing is improvements to classrooms and learning spaces. Not every school will get these. This school gets it because they've been over capacity. We've turned away kids for years, and it would help to and it looks like they'll stay that way. And so the proposal is to replace the portables with a permanent structure. And then health, safety, and security. This is in most schools, and it's where needed. As I said, some of the ones, cameras and so on, we've already taken care of. And it isn't included here, but it will include in the final one the health office upgrades too for every school, which is about a little less than $60,000 per health office. And that includes things like defibrillators and so on. And then finally, access to updated technology. Those will look pretty much the same in each school. It'll just kind of change in terms of the devices that are being provided. You'll notice transportation isn't there because you can't allocate it school to school. So the next one is Utterback. And Utterback, really the difference there between that and Davis, besides numbers and so on, generally it's the create and equip learning labs, which is under improvements to classrooms and learning spaces. So that way we get some project labs in the middle schools that students can use to really practice and apply what they've learned. And then we'll go to Palo Verde High. And Palo Verde High, what you see there is in the improvements in classrooms and learning spaces, we talk about the auto and the welding shops and the fine arts a little bit more. Okay, so every school can see what they're going to be getting with this bond program, at least what's proposed at this point. Okay, on to the next one. The next section is, and this is in your packet, it's the voter information packet introduction. I wanted to just kind of refer you to this so that you could see it and what it's generally going to look like. But basically, there's an introduction in that talks to who we are and how many kids we serve and so on. And one thing that's important that I want to bring your attention to is the last paragraph before we get into the actual different categories. It says, the bond will fund improvements throughout Tucson Unified, with 90% of it going to projects in every neighborhood school to improve classrooms and support students. Okay, that does include the yellow fleet. If you take the yellow fleet out, it's 86%. So the bulk of this bond, the vast majority of this bond, is going into neighborhood schools. And that's because it's needed, but it's also, as we developed the bond package, neighborhood schools, if you remember from the survey, was really important. So we moved things around and changed allocations where we could to support that neighborhood school concept. Okay, I've already gone through the repair, what the different categories are and what they include. That will be in the bond information packet. I've already gone through how did we, go to the next page, how we determined the bond amount, and I've discussed that already. How can the community be sure is another question that we'll use the bond as proposed. Well, first of all, by state law, you can't move money around more than 10% within those bond categories. So you have to use it per those categories. And then the second part is, per state law, you have to report annually to the governing board and really to the public. On top of that, one of the successes of the 2004 bond was we put a citizen committee together, and that committee met monthly to review all of the projects and make recommendations. And then they were the ones who reported annually to the governing board. And we're suggesting that that is a good way to go. It was very successful in that effort, and it should be successful in this one. We already talked about how the bond will affect property taxes. We ended it with, and this is a recommendation of Javelina, what will happen if the bond doesn't pass? Well, we won't be able to fund the projects. Now, we will be able to fund some because SFB will fund emergency projects, but it won't get to those things that are improvements. It'll get to those things that absolutely need to be done because there are number one, that the worst, the health and safety and falling apart in the facility condition index. So we can get those done, but getting other things done is a lot tougher. And then it just reiterates, the next page, reiterates what I already showed you in terms of what the bond program is, how it's laid out. The bond information packet will have the tax rate next to it and the impact on homeowners, so everybody can clearly see what the impact will be on their property taxes. All of the financial information that you saw from Stiefel will go into the voter information packet. Information from the State Facilities Oversight Board will go in there, and all the voter information will go in there. Basically, bond counsel, who's here, Mr. Gill, and Ricky Hernandez, our CFO, and the school superintendent for the county will all put that information together into the voter information packet. Now, the other things in your packet are the resolution calling for the election, so you can see what's involved there, and actually the bond language, so you can see exactly what's included in the bond language. And I'm just here to answer questions now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dean. That was a really good presentation and good succinct information on what is included in the bond. I'll turn over to Mr. Romero. I see you writing a lot of questions down next to me, so I'll turn over to you for the first round of questions.
All right. For this bond, how long is this? Is this for 20 years?
I believe it is 20 years to pay off, but that's probably a CFO question. Yep.
20 years.
Nodding his head.
Thank you. So you were talking about the Bond Exploratory Committee. Who were they? How were they nominated? How many were there?
There
we
were
know?
about 13.
12 or 13.
And just random people throughout our community, they want to be involved, or was something sent out looking for people?
I think this would be a good time to do a shout out to one of the members of our audience who led our Bond Explorers community. I want to thank Mr. Burke, Bruce Burke, for being here this evening, a former governing board member of our school district, who was your chair of the Bond Exploratory Committee. Oh. Not the chair, but an active member of the Bond Exploratory Committee. Thank you for that correction, Mr. Burke.
And to answer Board Member Romero, it was a combination of seasoned leaders like Mr. Burke, who had served in the capacity as a governing board member. And also we had a couple of parents. We had some of our association leaders involved. We had some district administration. We had some members of the business community and some of our nonprofit partners, just to kind of get a feel for what current attitudes, beliefs, and trends are in terms of opinions on a willingness to support a bond. So every member brought with them some kind of a background in terms of their work with TUSD.
Okay. And I heard earlier that even though it was unanimous that they think a bond should be there, but there were some people that thought maybe it should be less than more. Was that more of the majority? Was that a split? Was that leaning more towards, keeping with a higher number? Do we know?
It was about a quarter or a third at the most.
Quarter to the third that thought we should go lower?
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, as far as all these different categories that we have inside of here, health, security, safety, repairs, upgrades, etc., how are we determining the priorities for the different schools? Is there a method on that, or something like, this is like the AC's dead right now, we need to do that, versus someone says, hey, we're in a bad part of town, we need our safety fences up first? How does that look?
Basically, it follows the facility condition index. So if it's health and safety, if it's a failing system, if it's something that is critical to support our educational mission, it's a first priority. A second priority would be something that's functioning but needs a lot of repairs. It's something that is inefficient. It's something that we really need to replace, but it's not critical to replace. And the third one is kind of like the adequate idea in the FCI. It's the number 3 in the FCI, which is it's a functioning system. It's working okay. It supports our educational mission, but it could do better. And then the fourth one are the items that are really improvements to the system to make things more like new.
All right. And then as far as coming up with these totals, like just say where we at here, Palo Verde, lighting exterior, stadium lighting, $300,000. How do we just come up with other bids we've done in the past? How did we come up with all these different numbers for all these different schools?
Yeah, for that, I'm going to defer to facilities, and so that would be Greg Meyer or Damon Ballesteros.
Good evening, Governing Board, Dr. Shaw, Governing Board members, Dr. Trujillo, and Council. So what we took a look at is, again, trends and projects that we're currently doing that had been currently completed. When we're taking a look at and evaluating the FCI scores and taking a look at, as Mr. Nodine mentioned, when we're categorizing the needs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we took a look at what we had currently completed, what was in the works to be completed, and then provided trends in the industry for escalation clauses depending on if we did move forward with the bond. So that's how we came up with the costs associated with each of those systems. So whether it was field lighting, HVAC, roofing, flooring, we have trend analysis that we provide based on what we're doing currently in our department.
Okay, and then just a kind of another quick question on that, because I know some schools are going to use more money than other schools. Is there any? I guess we're doing what we need to for the schools, so that we shouldn't have any fighting with different schools, like saying, well, why did Sabino get this much more money than Choya did, or something like that? I guess.
That is correct. And I think the key phrase there is, again, is the minimum adequacy guidelines. Some schools are going to need more to bring them up to the minimum adequacy guidelines, others won't. And that depends on what's been done in the past, the age of the facility, the age of the infrastructure. So there's a lot of different components that go into how those costs were differentiated at each school.
Okay, and then another quick question, because the state has a facilities board, and have they been able to help us, assist us, or be, as far as in the past, what role have they done? From what I understand, they're supposed to help our school districts.
Yes, most definitely. So I could say currently with the Arizona State Facilities Board, we currently have around $15 to $16 million worth in projects right now. And a majority of those projects are, as Mr. Nodine mentioned, your higher ticket items. Say, for example, one that we have right now, it's $8 million, and that's Catalina High School roof. So again, the State Facilities Board has been a great partner and component for us to really reach out and show the need, make the presentation, provide the assessment and the reports so that we can get funding not only for design, but also construction.
So they have been they've helped us.
Most
Great.
definitely.
All right, and a couple more questions, and then I'll probably have some more as we do it later on. Now, Mr. Nodine, you had mentioned a citizens committee, I guess kind of like an oversight committee for something like this, because I don't think the voters would want anything without having some type of oversight. Do you recall how that citizens committee looked like for the last bond?
No, I wasn't that involved. It was about, I just went to some of the meetings, but I don't remember exactly who all the people were. But it was about 10 people, if I remember right. And it was a mix of different, as the exploratory committee was, a mix of different people within the community that have different expertise to help us.
Okay. I think that would be very important if we even have this discussion, that we have something for an oversight and at least start planning for that. And that's my questions for now. I'm sure I'll have more later. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. Just to piggyback off Mr. Romero's question about the State Facilities Board. So if this bond were to pass, we wouldn't be abandoned by the State Facilities Board, right? We'd still be able to, utilize their services for those large projects.
Yeah, Ms. Shaw, good evening, governing board members. We would still be able to use, you're essentially not barred from using the School Facilities Oversight Board at any point in time. I mean, because they provide emergency deficiencies correction, for example. We could be selling a bond and all of a sudden a whole roof could blow out at another school, and we don't have the ability to do that. SFOB is our resource to do that. In addition to building renewal grants that we've continuously been applying for, the Facilities Department will continue to seek out those grants from the School Facilities Oversight Board. So they will continue to play a role in the overall capital infrastructure of the district in addition to a bond project.
Okay. Thank you. Second question, in regards to the proposed capital improvements we see here on the screen. So I'm looking at access to updated technology for 66 million or so. Are these numbers fluid and flexible, where if we see that maybe we don't need the 66 million that's allocated here, we can move it around?
So the only flexibility you have is to move within 10% of each category, up or down. You can't eliminate an entire category altogether. In order to make any changes to these categories wholesale, we need to have another election and get the permission of the voters once again.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Mr. Romero, go ahead.
So if we do have this up for our election, how much is it going to cost TUSD to fund this election?
So the approximate cost is about $1 million. It'll hover around that amount of money for a November 2023 special election.
Even though there's a city election going on at the same time, it'll still cost us that money?
Yes, because even though the city of Tucson and the school district are overlapping jurisdictions, there is no requirement that they consolidate their elections. So the county recorder, the county elections department, and the city of Tucson's clerk's office, they would have to decide whether they'd want to consolidate. And then at that point, the county and the city would determine what the expenses would be. If this were a county-wide general election, let's say a 2024 presidential election year, then the expense would come down because there would be overlapping jurisdictions at that point who would all share in the expense for conducting an election on the same ballot.
Okay, thank you.
So the cost might come down from the $1 million if there's consolidation with the city.
Yes, financially, there could be some expense sharing for sure, because we do have an overlapping, even though our jurisdiction, our boundaries are larger than the cities, but yes, we share a large portion of the city's voters.
I don't see any other questions right now. Is there any other parts of the presentation for the bond?
So the only thing I did want to bring up is we do have Jim Giel from Gus Rosenfeld. He is our bond counsel from our outside bond counsel. And just, I really wanted him to just kind of give you a point really quickly about the resolution that's attached and just kind of what it takes in order to call for the election, so that you're prepared to just kind of look at that and what that means in terms of the resolution. So if I could have Jim come up.
Mr. President, members of the board, Jim Giel with Gus Rosenfeld. I am the district's longtime bond and election counsel, and happy to say so. I've personally served in that role since 2006, working with the district, including on the 2017 bond election, but we won't talk about that. But other members of my firm have preceded me, and we've served the district for decades in this role as bond and election counsel. In any event, the election resolution before you is kind of our standard form of election resolution. Doesn't change a whole lot from year to year. The resolution, should you choose to move forward with it next week, authorizes, as you've heard a few times, a bond election in November of 2023 in the amount of $480 million. The other two parameters that are established in the bond ballot, which I'll get into a little bit more, are an interest rate not to exceed 12%. We pick a high number because we never know how long it might take you to issue these bonds. Of course, if you were issuing bonds now, you'd be nowhere near 12%, but we generally advise that you pick a higher number in the bond ballot in case things change over the next 5 to 10 years when you could potentially be issuing these bonds. Although there is no current plan that you would wait that long, who knows? So we choose 12%, and that's fairly typical number around the state. And the other parameter, and this one established by statute, but we confirm it in the bond ballot, is that you won't issue bonds more than 20 years in life. So you heard a couple times earlier, you have up to 10 years, assuming you move forward and the voters approve in 23, in November of 23. You have up to 10 years to actually issue the bonds. Once the bonds are issued, they will mature within 20 years. And they mature serially, meaning annually. So you might have some bonds maturing in year 1, in year 5, year 10, so on. But in no case will the bonds go longer than 20 years from the date they're issued. The resolution directs the district administration and staff to work with the county. You heard the county's role in this process. They really kind of lead the effort. We work closely with the county and district administration. The district will enter into an IGA with the county. The statute says the county puts together the voter information pamphlet, but in reality, we do as your bond counsel. We'll share that with district administration. We'll share that with Stiefel. We'll get valuable input, and we'll come back with a final version of the pamphlet by the county's deadline, which I believe is sometime in August. That voter information pamphlet, which is designed to include all the information that a voter would need to make an informed decision on in the bond election. That pamphlet will be mailed to all households in the district with a registered voter. And this election is planned to be an all-mail ballot election, meaning there will be no polling places. The county may have voting centers, but there will be no neighborhood polling sites like you would anticipate in a general election year, such as next year, 2024. So again, all-mail ballot. You'll see some language in the resolution to a polling place election, the option for that, because we just like to keep our options open. We never know what might happen at the legislature, what might happen at the county in terms of the appetite for an all-mail ballot election. And if we had to switch over to a polling place election, we would want to have the authority in hand, so to speak, so that we could do a polling place even with this election if you choose to move forward. We don't anticipate that, but it has come up over the years now and then where a county will all of a sudden change its method. So we just want to have that authority in hand, of course, working with district administration. The resolution also establishes the date that members of the public must submit their pro or con statements to be included in the voter information pamphlet. Earlier presentations, they went through in a fair amount of detail what's contained in that voter information pamphlet. The one thing that I don't think was addressed was the pro-con statements. You as a board may not submit a pro statement. The statute doesn't allow it. If I was up here talking about an override election, you would in fact be required to submit a pro statement. But oddly enough, for a bond election, you may not do so. As a governing board, individual board members may do so, staff may do so, administration may do so, just like anyone else. The point I was getting to was the resolution establishes that deadline as August 11th. So whoever might want to submit a pro or con statement up to 200 words must do so by August 11th, and that's the date established by the county. But the statute says you must establish it as well. So that's why it's in your resolution. The resolution also has the form of the bond ballot as Exhibit A. You've got various bullet points, which are taken directly from the statute. So we don't encourage any creativity with those bullet points. Again, they're taken directly from the statute. It's also got those parameters that I mentioned earlier, not to exceed $480 million, not to exceed 12%, not to exceed 20 years. We will submit, if you decide to go forward, the form of that ballot to the Arizona Legislative Council as required by statute. They get the right to approve or disapprove the form of your ballot. We've had good luck, so we don't anticipate any issues, but we will go through that process. We've got a form of election notice attached to Exhibit B. We've got the request for arguments, pro-con statements, that the statute requires you publish. So assuming you move forward next week, we'll get that publication going after it's been translated, so the public, again, is aware of that August 11th deadline. And I think that's about it. Are there any questions about the election resolution or the election process in general?
Mr. Romero, go ahead.
So then, just kind of quick questions. If we're talking about doing this as a special election, so the voters, because we have the city election and then the TUSD doing this separate, then would the voters then get two separate ballots from both entities, City Tucson and TUSD?
Yeah, to Ricky's point earlier, that's really up to the county and the city to coordinate that. In my experience in Maricopa County, they do a good job of coordination. I'm just not sure of the Pima County's desire in that regard to coordinate. I don't know, maybe Ricky, you can speak more to that.
So, Mr. Romero, in my experience running school district elections, when we have had overlapping jurisdictions, county and city, we've had both instances. We've had them where two ballots go to a voter, right? So if you live in the city limits, Mr. Romero, you will get a ballot from the city clerk and a ballot from the county elections department. If we consolidate, generally the county elections department is the one who runs the election. You would get the one ballot and you'd have all of your eligible questions and candidates available on the ballot. Ultimately, to Jim's point, it's whether there's consolidation that the county and the city decide to do or not do.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Appreciate it very much.
In 2017, was it consolidated?
No.
Any other questions to our legal counsel? Okay, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, there was one other thing I wanted to mention because it wasn't mentioned earlier in any of the presentations, I don't believe. Just for some context, this year, 2023, is a very popular year for school bond elections, if you weren't aware. I am personally working on over 20 school bond elections, which is probably double the amount I ever have in 1 year. So you would be in good company, so just kind of know that. You would be dealing, of course, with the same factors that would influence any school board, rising inflation, construction cost, wanting to stay off of next year's ballot, which is a pretty common sentiment among school boards. So, and I wanted to mention that, and I also wanted to mention I have at least 2 other school districts you may be familiar with. Their bond amounts, both Phoenix Union and Mesa Unified, are both coincidentally at about the same amount that you're considering, $500 million. So it's a number that is not an outlier in Arizona, again, considering the inflation.
Thank you.
Sure.
Governing board members, over the last couple of months, we've been discussing this in various meetings, and because of open meeting laws, I never really get to ask you what you're thinking about this, except for at the meetings. And so this is an opportunity for us to talk about what we're thinking in terms of this bond election, since we are in our open meeting right now. Ms. Luna Rose.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. And thank you, everybody, for the presentation this evening. I know it's a lot of numbers, and probably a lot of people trying to keep up this evening. So thank you again for being as concise as you always are. I will just be frank, I'm in favor of this bond in voting for one. We have, and I'm not just saying this as as a parent. When I was on the site council, we were always trying to figure out how we were going to fix a bathroom or pay for some new instruments. Now, this was, long ago. We as a board, since I've been on the board, we've done this arts package. We've, done things. But at the time when my daughter was in preschool and kindergarten, I mean, there was a bathroom that was falling apart, and then I was hearing that from friends at their schools. There was a parent a couple of years ago at UHS that it went viral about the teachers' bathrooms, and it went viral on Facebook. And I'm not sure if Dr. Trujillo remembers that, but it was quite a thing. And I think we talk about our tours of our schools every time we do board reports. And so while we're touting the great things that are happening at our schools, we're also seeing rooms like Pister's music room is falling apart. And they do the best they can, and they're taping it up, and they're keeping it clean, but it is in serious disarray. And you're seeing that across the district. And so if anything that I would like to see while I'm on this board is getting this passed and getting our schools up to the standards that they deserve, and the facilities that our students deserve, that our teachers deserve, that our staff deserve to work in. There's only so much that a smile can go and make a roof better, or a classroom at Carrillo that's falling apart that I recently was talked to me about. So we're just hearing it across the district. And then, and I know I always talk about Rincon, so sorry. But, I was there the other night, and, it's one of the schools, it's one of our oldest ones that are in serious disrepair. And we've got Tucson High behind it, and Palo Verde, and Pueblo, and so on and so forth. And so if we want to become or maintain what we have, and then also show the rest of this community who we are as TUSD, this board it would be prudent for this board to pass a bond, because it's what's needed, it's what's right, and it's what our students and our staff deserve.
Mr. Romero.
Well, I don't think it's, the board's authority to pass this. This goes out to the public, the voting public out there. And keeping them in mind, public input, I think, has got to be huge. I would love to see what the responses from the website are going to be for public comment. Also, I'm sure we're going to get a call to the audience next week regarding this, both for pro and con. I think listening to what the public has to say is going to be key also. So I want to make sure that we listen to them. But just like Ms. Luna Rose says, we do a lot of these visits to the schools. I was at one school, and I'm not going to name anybody's names, but half the classrooms I visited, half had AC, half did not. I went to another school this upcoming year. All the carpet in their school classrooms are going to be 30 years old. I went to one school in the band room and went into the little band area, and the principal was showing me the damage in the ceiling. Band teacher comes in, he goes, "Oh, I'm so thankful you're here to fix this." I go, "Well, no, I'm just here to visit." So we see all these things that are out there, and yes, if we're going to be competitive with charter schools, private schools, we need to have these facilities and education things for our children, for our teachers. We need to give them the tools to succeed. But at the same time, the people that vote us in, we need to make sure we listen to them as well. So as of right now, again, I'm looking at all the options. I do have meetings of other people that have asked to meet with me to discuss things like this. I think this public information was great, both for me and I think those that are watching, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot more things coming from the public. So again, thanks again, everybody, for presenting.
Any last comments before we move off this topic? Ms. Shaw, Ms. Ekstrom? We'll come back to you.
Thank you, Dr.
Ms. Shaw, go ahead.
Thanks, everyone, for your presentation. I'm not sure how I feel about this yet, though. I do agree that we have so many capital improvement projects that we simply can't address at this point with our current funding. And so I'm interested to see what the public has to say at our next meeting. I certainly would like to see a citizen committee formed if this bond does pass. So I think community oversight is critical to make sure we're using this money responsibly. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. So yeah, if the public could please write to us and come speak at our next meeting to let us know how this will impact you. And also, our staff members, our students who see things every day, I would love to hear from them too. So holding most of my opinions for our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw.
I think for this to be successful, we really need to break it down and how these projects are going to be done. Because if we have 20 years that we have these bonds for, are these kids in kindergarten going to see this in their school lifetime? So I really think bringing that forward to the public is important. But I agree with my colleagues. We go to schools every month or so, and we do see things falling apart. And I'm just going to call out Safford because that is an old, very beautiful school, but inside needs so much work. And the administrators and principals and teachers there, they love being there. And just to be able to provide an upgrade for the students is very important. So I would like to hear from the public as well, for those in favor and for those against it, and why I think it's important. But at the end of the day, if we don't go out for a bond, none of these improvements are going to be done. So right now, I'm in favor of it.
And Ms. Rose, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. I just wanted to make should have thought about this a little bit ago, but in the last 15 years, we have seen capital cuts from the state legislature. The reason why we're asking for this bond as a board, and when I meant Mr. Romero by passing it, the 5 of us passing it, and then allowing the voters to make the final call, because we all are also citizens and we're all voters, is, our state legislature has not adequately funded us for the last several years. For years now. There was this committee, and I might have talked about this committee in the past, but there's a committee of parents several years back, Tucson Unified Parent Advocacy Council, whose sole goal was to get capital projects funded. And they lobbying the legislature, and I was part of that committee. And in the hundreds of millions of dollars that the state has shortchanged, Tucson Unified is appalling, and we wouldn't be here having this conversation. And so if anybody's listening, viewers at home, also talk to your legislators and let them know that, we are hurting, and hopefully we have, a newer administration that will be able to change that, and she's already added something, but I mean, we're hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's all documented. You can go back and look to see what, not just Tucson Unified, but our public schools in general. So I'm hoping, our next meeting, we'll hear from our community. They can let us know how they're feeling, but I'm still strongly in support of a bond.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the presentations this evening. I'm going to close off this topic. We still have the budget to review, and it's getting late, so I'll turn it over to Dr. Trujillo and Mr. Hernandez to take us to our final topics for this evening, 3.3 and 3.4.
Absolutely. And on any other given night, the district's budget would be the biggest thing that you're dealing with. You just happen to be in very momentous times right now. So, but not to steal Mr. Hernandez's thunder, tonight we're going to take you through your first look at the proposed budget, which will be back next week for governing board action to approve a proposed. I just want to start with just a disclaimer logistically. When you take action to approve a proposed budget and even a final budget in July, keep in mind that we can reappropriate money at any particular given time according to governing board direction. We have 2 opportunities each year to do budget revisions. So if you hear we're not satisfied that we don't think that there's enough funding in category A, we want to see more funding move from category A to category B, we can do that throughout the year, okay? And we can take care of that through the revisions process. That shouldn't really stop the governing board from doing the people's business of really voting to approve a proposed budget, essential capacity, so that we can meet state deadlines. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Hernandez.
Good evening, board members, once again. So it kind of a preview to that proposed budget presentation. I'm going to run a recap of the capital initiatives discussion. This is a brief presentation to just, it dovetails into the larger conversation of the proposed budget presentation. This specifically, we'll talk about capital initiatives in the curriculum and instruction division and the facilities management departments. I do know that it says May 23rd. I haven't been sleeping here for 3 weeks waiting to give you this presentation. It's just that we delayed it until today, okay? So these are the proposed capital initiatives that we presented to you back in the month of April. In the curriculum and instruction side of the house, online web platforms of just over $1 million, a 5-year financing for an English language arts adoption for middle and high school, $740,000, a science adoption for our high schools at a 5-year financing of $588,000, and a health adoption for our middle and high schools with a 5-year financing of $58,000. On the facilities management side, we've got the completion of the projects that the governing board approved back in the spring of 2022. Those are still getting done. We've got about $3.8 million worth of projects to complete. Our food services warehouse is in dire need of a new roof, $2 million there. The Borman Restoration Project, though the governing board also approved a contribution of 20% to the overall cost of the restoration of the Borman School on Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The remaining cost right now is $2.7 million. That is an ongoing appropriation. And then school safety upgrades that this governing board approved last fall, a remaining balance of about $1.5 million. So digging into the curriculum and instruction online platform, so there were several online platforms, actually 21 platform licenses that the district purchased through ESSER funds that were used during the peak of remote instruction when all of our kids were sitting at our kitchen tables doing their everyday schoolwork. These were funded with ESSER. That funding will end this month, June 30th of this month. So the Curriculum and Instruction Division evaluated all of these platforms, and they are recommending that these 7 online platforms continue into fiscal year 2024 and beyond. These are the 7 that are listed. Some of them are very near and dear to my kids. iExcel and iReady in particular are used by my 2 boys. But all of these are used across all our school district schools. All of our kids use them in the classroom and remotely. This is a recommendation to continue funding these platforms into fiscal year 2024 and beyond. Adoptions. So we are in dire need of all of them. Our secondary English language arts adoption, middle school, we previously adopted an ELA adoption in the year 2000. In high school, 2000 and 2001. And for our advanced placement ELA, the last adoption took place in 2009 and 2010. And again, in 2019 and 2020, we had several components. A total adoption would cost $3.1 million that could be financed over the course of 5 years at $740,000. Next, a high school science adoption. The last time we did an adoption, Pluto was still a planet. It is no longer a planet. Between 2000 and 2007, at a cost of $2.9 million, financed over 5 years at $587,000 a year. And finally, a health adoption for our high schoolers. Last time we did that was in 2006. I was 3 years into my tenure at TUSD at that point, so we haven't had a health adoption for our high school since then. $290,000 financed over 5 years at $58,000 a year. On the facilities management side, ongoing projects, like I mentioned, the Borman K-8 renovation. In March of 2022, the board approved a $5.3 million allocation, which is a 20% match to a Department of Defense grant to essentially renovate the Borman K-8 school on Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The total cost is actually $26 million. The bulk of that is being paid for by the federal government. And $2.7 million represents the ongoing remaining balance of that project into fiscal year 24. Also, in spring of 2022, the governing board approved renovations to restrooms in 4/5 of our high schools. So $5.3 million allocated to Choya, Pueblo, Rincon UHS, and Tucson High. Tucson High and Pueblo's restrooms have been renovated. They are now being completed. They will be done by the end of the month. Choya and Rincon UHS are next. So this is just an ongoing appropriation that was already approved to now begin the work on Rincon UHS and Choya beginning in fiscal year 24. Ongoing projects, deferred maintenance projects that were part of a spring 2022 improvement project that the governing board approved. These were funded with a combination of capital and ESSER funds. As you can see, a lot of different systems were part of that project or part of that work. We still have about $1.3 million in remaining work to be completed as part of that project that is expected to be completed by the end of fiscal year 24. And finally, safety improvement. So in October 25th of this fiscal year in 2022, this board approved a $2.5 million investment in safety and security infrastructure across the district, identified 4 different types of priorities across 13 different schools. We currently have about $1.5 million worth of projects remaining to be completed over the course of the next 12 months into fiscal year 24 as part of this safety improvement project that was approved back in October. Food service warehousing, so warehouse roofing. In December of 2021, the board approved a $950,000 deferred maintenance improvement for the roof. However, there is now a request for $2 million to completely replace the roof on the food service warehouse. This includes upgrades to HVAC And to repair the damaged interior, there's currently spaces within the food service warehouse that are inaccessible to employees due to potential mold hazards as a result of the roof. The HVAC cannot be repaired until the roof is replaced. The trust will repair the damaged interior. However, they will not start on the interior until we replace the roof. We're going into monsoon, can't get it wet. Our insurance won't do that for us. Like I said, the damaged space is currently inaccessible, so we've had food service staff who works in pretty awful conditions sometimes, especially in the heat of summer. And we've got a lot of food staff who are scattered across the district because they can't use the space at 100% at their current facility. So $2 million to actually get that roof to where it needs to be. And with that, any questions on this specific part of the presentation?
Ms. Luna Rose.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. We were just talking about school facilities board. That's not considered an emergency?
Because there are no students in
Oh,
food service.
boo.
Yeah, there have to be students present in the facility.
Really?
Yes.
Even though it's food that we're providing to our students? I see that this.
We can have students cook the food and maybe they'll give us the money. But other than that, I don't think
does Ms.
Lindsay-
Aguilar need
I don't
an
think
intern?
Lindsay would be very happy with that if the kids were cooking food. So no, students have to be present in the facility in order for emergencies, deficiencies funding to be provided.
Okay. Thank you.
You may proceed, Mr. Hernandez.
All right. So next presentation, Gene. I know I stand between you and your pillow, so I'm getting there. All right. So dovetailing into this. So this is a more comprehensive overview of the entire budget for next fiscal year 2024. I will have a formal presentation or the formal forms, I guess you can say, for the fiscal year 24 proposed budget that needs to be approved, and I'll give you the timeline here. So we'll go through the statutory deadlines. What are the various budget limits that are incorporated into creating the budget for next fiscal year? What are some of the elements that we are currently focusing on in the budget as part of our conversations with you all and internally within administration? What are some of the priorities that we've included? Changes to classroom site. Property taxes are always, a great topic to talk about at 9 o'clock at night, and classroom spending estimate. So getting into budget deadlines. I've covered these with most of you, but just as a kind of recap, July 5th is the last day to approve a proposed budget for next fiscal year. We have to provide a notice of public hearing to our community between the 5th and the 15th. If we do it earlier, it's fine. We just have to do it for 10 days between proposed and adoption. July 15th is the deadline to adopt a budget and present it to ADE. That allows us to start spending. On October 15th, we will come back to you with an annual financial report for fiscal year 23's expenses. As Dr. Trujillo mentioned, we have two opportunities to revise our budget. One is December 15th. That is if required. We are notified by ADE if we have to adjust up or down on our budget limits or we want to make other changes to the budget. The last day to revise our budget is May 15th, which we just did last month for the current fiscal year. That is to either capture additional capacity we may have missed or make changes that we need to make if we have to go in the other direction. So what are some of the assumptions that are incorporated in the budget that you'll be presented next week? First of all, the signed budget by the governor, she signed it May 11th. Those elements are going to be incorporated in the information that's provided here and in the budget forms that you will see next week. There is a 2% inflationary increase to the base support level, just shy of $96 increase to that amount. There is also just under a 1% increase to the base support level by eliminating the results-based funding fund. So we do have several schools in the district who do reap the rewards of results-based funding, about $44 or so. So, we're waiting for guidance from the Department of Education on what happens with that fund. But in the meantime, that gets added to our base support level. There is an increase to the Group B weight, a new Group B weight for free and reduced priced eligible kids. So we have that coming in our favor. An increase to district additional assistance, which is capital of just over 9%. which includes now a 2% annual ongoing inflation adjustment. Before today, there was no inflationary factor to district additional assistance. There is now one going forward. However, it is subject to legislative appropriation, unlike the 2% that it's provided in base support, which is voter protected. And there is a one-time allocation of $300 million to all school districts and charter schools in Arizona that is allocated by the proportion of our Group A weighted student ADM. It's a one-time shot in the arm. It can be used for M&O or capital or both. So additional budget factors, our classroom site fund, Proposition 301 for some people, did receive a $50 increase per student, $758. We are incorporating just about a 1.7% decrease in our average daily membership at this point. A great positive is the increase to our teacher experience index is noted there. The average number of certified teacher FTE years compared to the average number of Arizona years overall, essentially our teachers on average are more experienced than the average Arizona teacher. So we're getting more funding for that, about $2 million more in funding. This is our unweighted average daily membership. The boxes on the left, the red boxes, show you what we're currently projecting and we've incorporated into the proposed budget. These can always change. We are a current year funded school district, so if by the 100th day of school in 2024, this goes up, then our capacity will increase. But at this point, we are remaining just kind of steady Eddie, nothing is moving. The gold boxes are what was in the proposed budget this time last year. So obviously you can see the delta. Now, just as a reminder, the enrollment are the number of kids registered in the district. The average daily membership is the attendance of those kids less the withdrawals over the first 100 day of school. Okay, so not every kid who enrolls is going to equal to 1.0. If they enroll in October 1st, then it's going to be proportional. If they leave by October 1st, then we get less than that. So it's the average attendance of those students for the first 100 days of school. But enrollment counts. So just kind of keep that in mind. We still need to get those bodies, those kids in here. Now, what are the budget limits looking like year over year? So on the left column, the proposed budget right now and the May revision that you just approved about a month ago and kind of what the variance is. Now, the total weighted student count seems kind of contradictory to the last slide because this is going up by 400 students. But the one thing to take into account is that this is the weighted student count that also includes all of our special ed students, for example, all of our English language learner students that are in here, and the increase in the weight to our free and reduced lunch student count. So all of those weights that we are provided have gone up, or the numbers themselves have gone up, and therefore the weighted student count has gone up as well. Our base support level, so as a result of that 2.9% increase that we're receiving, about $7.4 million in additional funding. Our teacher experience index, because we do have more experienced teachers than kind of the average Arizona teacher, about $2 million. Our transportation aid remains flat. That is a frozen number. Our non-federal audit fee, so what we literally pay for the non-federal portion of our audit gets added to our budget, about $120,000 for next year. The DSEG M&O, that is currently what our schools and departments have been allocated for next year for DSEG, $61.4 essentially million. It's about a $2 million increase to the May revision, but the May revision included the capital reallocations, which is why there's a difference. The budget balance carry forward, right now we're estimating about $24 million carry forward into next year, which is a decline of about $4 million. The energy savings transfer, so we pay a lease in order to fund our solar array across the district. We're actually going to pay a $2.7 million next year, just under $60,000 less, as it's kind of like essentially just a mortgage. We're slowly paying that mortgage down. Prop 123 funding, we're coming into the last of the remaining 2 years of Prop 123, $2.7 million. Our current estimate of that one-time $300 million influx to TUSD is going to be $13.1 million. That is based on the numbers we know today. The Department of Education does a statewide recalculation in the month of July. When we know what that number is, that number will change. It could change up, it could change down, depending on what our proportion is. Right now, our estimate is 13.1. We're also recommending a transfer of $2 million from the unrestricted capital fund to M&O. This will bring the total M&O budget to just over $394 million, about nearly a $23 million increase year over year in M&O. Now, on the capital side, the capital outlay formula has an increase just under $2 million. That's the inflation plus the additional funding in capital outlay. The transfer out of capital to M&O, DSEG capital of $2.3 million, and a estimated budget balance carry forward of $14 million. So about $37.8 million in capital, about $855,000 less than this year. So essentially remaining flat on the capital side. But what is our ongoing budget focus? So we want to continue to support salary, wage, and benefit adjustments to our employees. We want to make sure that our compensation is market aligned, that we target investment in hard to fill positions, and we want to make sure we're focusing on the employee share on the cost of benefits going into next fiscal year. We continue to make sure that we're developing a post-ESSER budgeting strategy and planning. You know, we're all kind of headed towards that 9/30/2024 deadline where all ESSER funding will end. We need to make sure that we're looking at what we need to do beyond that point. Recalibration of the DSEG budget now, of the post-unitary status DSEG budget, now that we're no longer under court order, to make sure that that DSEG budget is properly aligned to what the priorities of the board and the district need to be. Always meeting or exceeding our 1% budget carry forward. 1% is great. GFOA, Government Finance Officers of America, recommends 5%. So minimum of 1, my target is not the minimum. So, but that's kind of where we are. And obviously continued successful increased investment in classroom spending. We're always heading in the right direction. We've been heading in the right direction in classroom spending, and we want to continue to maintain that going into next year. Now, what are some of the priorities that this board and prior boards have committed us to going into fiscal year 24? So in December of last year, kinder funding from ESSER, 30% of kinder funding from ESSER is an offset. This board prior board approved a $15 minimum wage this time last year. The increase to benefits, there is obviously an increase, and obviously the offset that was approved back in February. The adjustment to our school nurses' salaries that was just approved last month. An upcoming change to the custodian and monitor formula. So custodians, we want to make sure that we have a minimum of 2, a monitor a minimum of 1, or whatever they currently have. So we want to make sure that we establish a floor for every one of our schools when it comes to custodians and monitors. The increase that was approved just last month, the M&O portion of the increase, and the upcoming utilities and telecom increase for next fiscal year, which is currently projected to be $5.9 million. And the reason it's that high is because it's the increase that you approved in April, plus the increase that's coming for next year that we already know is coming. So it's just under $6 million to turn the lights on, essentially, next year. So about $9.5 million in M&O priorities that are incorporated in that budget. On the capital side, we've kind of gone over a lot of these: school security infrastructure, our facilities projects, the Borman reconstruction, the food service warehouse, all of our online platform, the 3 adoptions, our school bus leases, our white fleet leases for school safety and facilities, and the cloud migration of time clock and iVisions. Just about $13.2 million in priorities that are all going to be incorporated and have been incorporated in our existing capital budget. Classroom site, Prop 301 essentially. Right now, without kind of going over the whole thing, I really want to point your direction in the blue box. Those are the funding initiatives that we're looking at for next year. As part of the fiscal year 24 salary increase package that was approved last month, we will be increasing the supplemental base pay for all eligible employees in TDRA by $1,000 per FTE. So they will go up to 8,600 from the current 7,600. The performance pay will go up by $70, so up to 1,520 per FTE. And the funding for the pre-K exceptional ed teachers, $4,000 per FTE is also incorporated into this projection. So right now we're projecting about just shy of $39 million in expenditures that include those three initiatives. We're expecting about available funding right now of just about $48.5 million and an ending balance of just about $9.5 million if these things hold true. This is currently an estimate. Property taxes. So Randy Stein mentioned to you about the fact that the primary formula is very statutorily driven, and that's absolutely correct. The property tax rates are calculated based on a very strict legislative formula. We cannot really move away from that formula. We can change or increase or decrease our budget capacity except for those 4 items that are in there: adjacent ways, overrides, dropout prevention, and DSEG. So we fund $63.7 million in DSEG, $767,000 in dropout. We don't have any overrides, and then we fund $1 million for adjacent ways. Those are on the primary property tax levy side of the equation. In addition, one other element that we have to levy for that is not an increase is the taxes not levied as a result of GPLETs, government property lease excise taxes. So when the county or the city takes a property off the tax rolls because they're going to give tax incentives, we need to redistribute the value of that property and the tax that we would have levied to all the remaining taxpayers in the school district. We still need to collect taxes for those. We just don't collect them from those property owners. Secondary property taxes are for overrides, a bond debt service, and desegregation. There is a asterisk on DSEG because there is currently pending litigation regarding DSEG and whether that will continue to be on the secondary side of the formula. The state Supreme Court has not decided that case at this point, but there's a hyperlink in there if anybody wants to fall asleep later reading some case law. So, but this is currently the estimate that we've put together. So going from one fiscal year to the next, the net primary levy will decrease by about $10. The secondary levy will actually decrease by about another $11. So overall, the property tax levy on a $100,000 home is estimated to increase just under $21 for next fiscal year. There's a breakout on the right side of the screen of what that primary rate and that secondary rate look like in order to get to those levies. So the rates are one thing, the levy is the driver. The levy is different for everybody. My house is different, is valued different than Ms. Ekstrom's house, than Dr. Shaw's house. And so whatever that rate is applied to the value of their home, they will pay that. There is a rebate that every homeowner, a Class 3 homeowner, is eligible to receive up to $600. The state pays that essentially, and it becomes a deduction on your property taxes, and you will see that as a negative that's called less state aid to education on your tax bill or your tax statement. These are all ultimately subject to verification by the Pima County School Superintendent, and his office, Superintendent Williams' office, will turn those into the Board of Supervisors to approve them the third Monday in August. And just a quick glimpse at what we're currently proposed. Our proposed budget will lead in terms of the classroom spending estimate. We're projecting a 53.5%, almost a 54% portion of our budget will go into classroom instruction. We will continue to have a significant, almost 70% of our budget, if not more than that, going into supporting the classroom, our students, and our teachers. So our classroom instruction or our classroom funding overall will continue to increase as we move into the future. This is based on what our proposed budget is for next fiscal year. Certainly, once dollars are actually spent, that is the number that the Auditor General will report on. With that, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Governing Board, any questions about our budget, the capital budget presented earlier? Anything you want to discuss at 9:30 in the evening? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you.
right, Dr. Trujillo, 4.1, future meeting dates and agenda items.
Yeah, I think next week speaks for itself. Biggest items on the agenda. Board's going to decide whether or not to call the question and go out for a special bond election. Board is going to vote on the code of conduct. And of course, you've got your proposed budget. We also look forward to bringing forward a new slate of assistant principals will also be on that agenda for your consideration next week.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Trujillo, and I'm going to call the meeting adjourned. I love having this here.